playing as Tathagata in Marvel, I suppressed Thanos for 500 years. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 101, Heaven and Earth Dragnet. Chapter 101, A Dragnet, 2024-08-19. Author, Good Monster. Chapter 101, A Dragnet, 2024-08-19. Lin Feng smiled, spreading his hands upward. A golden sphere of light coalesced within his grasp, emanating countless streams of light that spread outward, instantly forming a massive formation. The agents fleeing westward were unaware that the very ground beneath their feet was already engulfed in the formation. No matter where they fled, they could not escape Lin Feng's grasp, not to mention that all their equipment had already lost signal. Faced with such an overwhelming odds, their fate was sealed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Natasha was rushing towards them, her mind fixed on her mission, unaware of the impending danger. Suddenly, startled birds took flight. Gunshots rang out through the trees. Amidst a back-and-forth exchange of words, curses mingled with foreign language, one side roared. "Who's shooting? Everyone's busy evacuating. Why are you shooting? Why aren't we evacuating?" Professor Lin Feng. Amidst the shouting, gunfire continued. The two groups engaged were a foreign intelligence agency and an armed group. The former had been right there when Lin Feng eliminated the mercenary leader, witnessing everything clearly. Undeterred by the mission, they fled alongside the other foreign intelligence agencies. Unexpectedly, they encountered the newly arrived, unaware armed group. Why on earth would they be antagonized? The intelligence agency gritted their teeth helplessly as they faced the increasingly fierce attack. "Hand over Professor Lin Feng, or you won't leave," the armed group shouted again, convinced that the eagerly departing intelligence agency must have captured Lin Feng, otherwise, they wouldn't be so desperate to evacuate. Seeing no point in explaining, the intelligence agency increased their firepower, and a fierce exchange of blows ensued. Suddenly, the tranquil forest was ablaze with bullets, and the sound of intense gunfire echoed through the woods. The intelligence officers clenched their guns, silently cursing their bad luck. The others had vanished long ago, yet they had to run into these fools. Now they couldn't escape, trapped here. What if Professor Lin Feng discovered them? They couldn't resist another attempt at negotiation. "Stop. The situation is critical. Everyone's run. If you want to survive, stop and retreat west." "Who are you kidding me? Do you think we're brainless?" The response was an even more intense onslaught. The director of the intelligence agency paled at the enemy's words. In this life-or-death situation, they were in constant danger of being discovered by Professor Lin Feng. Furthermore, if other forces took advantage of the situation and attacked them, they would all be wiped out. Even as they pondered these thoughts, lamenting the unfairness of their fate, bursts of gunfire rang out from elsewhere. The elites, intent on escaping, were bewildered, puzzled as to why they weren't avoiding Professor Lin Feng, but were instead fighting each other. Natasha, who had been alone, was particularly troubled. She'd initially rushed over when she heard the gunfire, but before she'd taken a few steps, she heard more gunfire from a different direction. Natasha kept running back and forth between the different sounds, completely baffled. The only information she had was that these elites, gathered from all over the world, were engaging in a seemingly aimless, blood-curdling brawl like street thugs, their suicidal aggression setting the entire forest ablaze. Natasha couldn't understand what was going on. She repeatedly glanced at her reconnaissance equipment, but the signal had been dead for a long time. Perhaps someone had sabotaged the signal. She could understand that, but the current situation left her completely baffled. In the jungle, the most foolish thing to do was to engage in a gunfight. It offered no benefit other than exposing herself and wasting ammunition. Moreover, those caught in the crossfire were clearly not driven by desperation, but rather by a frenzy of killing. Natasha shook her head, deciding to save herself first and then figure out what was going on. However, over an hour had passed. The intelligence agency troops initially blocked by the armed group had been completely annihilated. They watched Landon collapse, never understanding what had happened until their death. The intelligence agency director was puzzled as everyone fled westward, only to have his comrade, who had been just a shadow in front of him, suddenly appear behind them. A bullet from his comrade instantly pierced his heart, and before he collapsed, He saw his comrade's face, also filled with bewilderment. For a moment, everyone seemed trapped in a folded space, a chaotic crowd, and the constant force of the bullets, driven out of control by fear and confusion. Swords are blind, bullets are merciless. The bullets and grenades whizzing through the mountains and forests had claimed countless lives. The remaining troops that had not been completely wiped out were dwindling. The world's finest intelligence officers and agents engaged in a chaotic battle, their minds completely annihilated. By this time, the French intelligence agency was completely routed, their leader running wild and shouting, "Hold! We surrender! No more shooting, stop shooting!" These cries slightly awakened some of the survivors' wits. Many of those engaged in the fierce fighting halted their attacks. Seeing the 3 or 2 remaining French troops surrender, their hands raised high above their heads, this non-threatening scene calmed everyone down a bit. MI8's agent number 7, William, also calmed down a bit. He couldn't help but think, hadn't he been desperately trying to leave with his colleagues just a few hours ago? Weren't they afraid of Professor Lin Feng and wary of the Chinese troops coming from the east? Why were they all fighting here? And most of their opponents were from the same organization, just as eager to leave. Looking at their enemies, their guns raised, they shared a look of bewilderment. What the hell is going on? William lowered his head, pondering. His gaze stumbled across a patch of grass beside him, and he froze. Agent number 7, William, paled, and spoke with a trembling voice. I remember this place. It's where we were camouflaged earlier. It's not far from where Professor Lin Feng was standing. But we've already walked quite a distance, so why are we still here? His companion's expressions also changed upon hearing his words. That's right. It's right here. These are the footprints I left. The shape is unique to our bureau, and the shoe size is the same. Yeah, and how did we suddenly start fighting? I don't remember anything. William's expression darkened even more at his companion's words. It was as if a demon had dragged them into a web of war. Their ceasefire also caught the attention of Lin Feng, who was standing nearby. He had expected these people to continue the fight, but he hadn't expected a country to actually surrender first. But it didn't matter. As long as these people couldn't escape this formation, the situation wouldn't change. Chapter 102 Fatal Situation. Chapter 102, A Deadly Situation 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 102, A Deadly Situation. As long as he wanted, their own will was like bubbles, dispersing with a puff of air. Besides, he hadn't really finished yet. If he could just give him some time to relax, that would be quite a relief. Meanwhile, the French intelligence agency had emerged from their bunker and slowly walked west, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Everyone watched from behind their cover. No one fired a shot, no one spoke. An eerie silence enveloped everyone, lost in thought. If surrender worked, should they follow suit? Would everyone leave with their hands raised? But those who had witnessed how Lin Feng had made the mercenary leader vanish wanted to leave, while others who hadn't witnessed it were eager to join in. For a moment, this small area felt like a besieged city, and everyone was mired in anxiety. Furthermore, they had just fought, and many of them still had lives on their guns. It would be difficult for them to return now. On the battlefield, where thoughts clashed, the French raised their hands. Though their bodies trembled slightly, their hearts pounded as they had already advanced a distance. Victory was just around the corner. Perhaps they would soon be out. It seemed surrender was still possible. Agent 7, William, knew clearly that even if the French could escape, they would most likely perish here, until everyone else was gone. It seemed they shouldn't have come to China so easily to capture Lin Feng. Once the gunfire started, there was no retreat. No. I can't give up. Just as William was about to give up, a ray of sunlight pierced through the trees, illuminating his face. He thought of his homeland, and the desire to live surged within him. He decided to give it his all. Wait, he shouted, and everyone's eyes turned from the French to him. The French paled, unsure what the word wait meant. They had already left their guns behind. Were they truly cornered? William's clear voice echoed across the deadly silence of the battlefield. He demanded, "How many of you here still want to go back? Want to leave here and return to your own countries?" Countless shaken eyes filled the silence. William suppressed his pounding heart, his breathing rapid, but he still tried his best to speak clearly. Did we want to leave here before? Because we saw Professor Lin Feng's immense power, it was beyond our reach. Even if all of us here were combined, no. Even if all the countries behind us were combined, no one could stand against Professor Lin Feng's might. Isn't leaving now the best option? Why are we still fighting here? You're lying. Professor Lin Feng is in your hands. You're just lying to us, making us come all this way in vain. You can go back and collect the bounty. An armed leader, who hadn't seen Lin Feng's golden eyes, shouted. Blood stained his beard, and his twisted face was itched with a pair of distrustful gray eyes. Enough. You're the ones blinded by the bounty. Think about it. Lin Feng is a living person. If it's as you say, then why are so many of us running? We can't all be in the same group. Rage robbed William of his usual composure, and he hurled insults at the man. The leader of the armed group fell silent upon hearing this. Indeed, if someone had truly captured Lin Feng, a fierce fight would have been the first thing they do. But it wasn't until they arrived that the large-scale fighting began. But I don't believe Lin Feng is as formidable as you say, the leader said, his momentum weakening considerably. William didn't intend to dispute Lin Feng's strength. After all, more than half the people present had witnessed it firsthand. Even without what happened today, the previous live broadcast from the moon was enough to make everyone know that Lin Feng was a legendary figure unparalleled in the world. Furthermore, Lin Feng's connection to the primordial continent and his mysterious identity. William shuddered at the thought. Anyway, haven't you noticed? Most of us were fleeing, but somehow we were dragged into this place and started a firefight. If it weren't for mutual suspicion, perhaps we would have already made it out of this forest safely, William said, feeling a little uneasy. He didn't quite believe his last words, but he still tried to remain optimistic. At this moment, many people echoed him. Yes, let's get out of here. What's the point of fighting anymore? There's no Lin Feng here. Don't go crazy. Let those who want to leave go first. We can be checked. For a moment, those who wanted to leave were the majority. A wave of shouts echoed through the forest, which had just been filled with gunfire. The desire to live overwhelmed everything. William, seeing the situation was inevitable, said, let's leave together. Okay, let's go. Everyone gathered their weapons and helped their injured companions to their feet. They moved excitedly, wishing they could take flight. Then, someone stood up. Do you really think you can get away? A weak voice pierced the gathered momentum like a needle, and everyone looked toward the source. A large, dark-faced man, his eyes red, clutched his teammate's beloved gun. He stood up, his body trembling like an autumn leaf in the breeze. It's Mark. What do you mean? If you don't want to leave, stay here and don't bother us. As the other spoke, Mark, seeing the heated reaction, seemed disheartened and said nothing more. His words unnerved William. A deep instinct told him not to ask further, but fear couldn't overcome curiosity. He looked at Mark and spoke gently. Mark, what do you mean by that? Mark shook his head and forced a wry smile. Have you not considered? Those who died, did they deserve to die? We only went deep into the mountains for a mission, but the moment we entered, without doing anything, we were caught on the crossfire. Why were you shooting at us? Weren't you trying to escape? I just don't understand why the shooters now claim they were trying to escape, while we, the innocent, have already lost our lives. Moreover, we're in this massive firefight. Our originally classified mission, this covert infiltration, has become so high profile. Is it possible we can even leave the country? Even if we leave this mountain, we can't go back. His words caused everyone to fall silent again. William was already dizzy. The chaos, the mutual harm, no one could explain clearly. What they had seen could not be shared with those who came after them, yet everyone had indeed been inexplicably caught up in the crossfire. The situation was like a mess, and no one could make sense of it. Chapter 103 Big Misunderstanding. Chapter 103, A Big Misunderstanding 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 103, A Big Misunderstanding. Speaking of Huaxia, don't you have any doubts? We've been here for 3 or 4 hours, and Huaxia hasn't shown up yet. I suspect this is all a setup by Huaxia. A setup to ensnare us all. A setup. William looked at Fred, who was speaking. Fred was a veteran EU agent with extensive experience. Even during William's training, he was already a top-tier agent. Fred lowered his eyelids, his already pale face now drained of even a trace of color. Haven't you ever had any doubts? How could someone as important as Professor Lin Feng just disappear like that? Putting aside his own intentions, how could Huaxia allow him to disappear without a trace? His words made everyone shake their heads, regretting their hasty acceptance of this mission. Had they known this, they would never have agreed to infiltrate Tuaksha, let alone capture Professor Lin Feng. But life is hard to predict. In the silence, Fred spoke again. Let's go. There's no point in talking. Staying alive is what matters. His voice seemed to age, and everyone calmed down under his gaze. Arguments ceased, and even suspicions became a waste of energy. Everyone gathered together, intent on escaping this hell. However, those who were left alone were not so lucky. Natasha Romanoff, America's top agent and most experienced, was lost in confusion. She was eager to reach her destination, but she kept passing the same spot several times in a row. What is going on? Natasha, always calm and composed, began to question her life. She stared at a jagged rock in front of her. She was certain she had passed it 11 times since the first time. Now, looking at the rock, she felt her eyes blur. She was sure her vision was fine, but what was going on? She was nearly driven mad by her predicament, yet the sound of gunfire continued to blare in her ears. Danger lurked around her, yet she felt trapped like a little white rabbit, unable to escape. Is this Chinese magic? Natasha's heart raced with panic. She rarely set foot on Chinese territory, but now she truly feared it. After trying countless methods and finding no escape, she became truly distraught. Natasha's head spun, and she could barely stand. Someone, help me, she muttered, her vacant eyes losing their usual sharpness. Natasha couldn't help but recall the feeling she'd had watching the live broadcast of the moon landing, a feeling of powerlessness against the very heavens. Just then, a figure passed by her. Natasha's eyes flickered. Is it him? Why is he here? Is he trapped? Or, Natasha's eyes followed Lin Feng's back, and she almost instantly determined why he was there. No wonder Lin Feng had vanished before the eyes of the entire world. He was trapped here. She was more than convinced of the power of this spell. It was no surprise that Professor Lin Feng was trapped here. Natasha's eyes regained their sharpness, the look of a hunter upon stalking his prey. She quietly took steps toward Professor Lin Feng. Unbeknownst to her, the very prey she so longed for was baring its claws at her. In Lin Feng's eyes, Natasha was no different from a rabbit caught unawares in his trap. He didn't even need to engage her in real combat, he could already have her willingly falling into his trap. Lin Feng remained calm and composed, leaving Natasha to fall unnoticed into his web. By then, Natasha had already reached Lin Feng's back. With a single slender, powerful arm, she could instantly pin him down. She called out, "Professor Lin Feng." Natasha's confident voice had a certain allure to Lin Feng. He suppressed his inner teasing and feigned sudden arrest, his neck hunched, turning around with exaggerated surprise written all over his face. He and Natasha exchanged glances, and Lin Feng, feigning the first time he saw her, breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Hello." He then feigned a puzzled look at Natasha, as if pondering his next question. Seeing Lin Feng's expression, Natasha's confidence returned, almost forgetting the shock she had experienced in the woods. She spoke calmly. "Hello, Professor Lin Feng. I'm Agent Romanoff. I'm here because I received information that you were trapped, and I've been specially ordered to retrieve you. Perhaps you're not aware, but the moon landing was a success. As one of the greatest contributors, your safety is of paramount importance to the international community. But I didn't expect you to be trapped in this chaotic dimension. The cause of this situation isn't entirely clear yet, but my priority is to escort you out. We can investigate the cause later." Natasha's words brought a smile to Lin Feng's face. He couldn't blame him for finding it amusing. After all, he was the instigator of this chaotic dimension, yet someone trapped and bewildered here was still trying to get him out immediately. He felt like a cat playing the mouse, amused by Natasha's efforts yet complete ignorance. Lin Feng nodded, a look of sudden realization on his face. "Thank you very much. I really want to get out of here right now, but..." Lin Feng looked at Natasha with a hint of hesitation and fear. He asked, looking at her, "But what's with all that gunfire? Are there other people here besides us?" Natasha froze for a moment, a flicker of panic crossing her face. She thought to herself, Professor Lin Feng is truly lucky. He doesn't even realize these people are here for him, yet he hasn't run into a single one. What are the odds of that happening? Besides, are the so-called top international agents really that bad these days? But, it's also her own good fortune to have encountered Lin Feng first. She smiled. The situation is very complicated right now. Many people from various countries and forces are targeting you, which is why I'm here. Natasha wore a sincere smile, feeling a slight sense of pride. Her words could be interpreted in many ways, but she was confident that Lin Feng would understand her as coming to help him. She didn't want to delay any further, lest there be more trouble. Now that she had found Lin Feng, she should bring him back to report as soon as possible. She turned and moved forward, scanning the area, exploring the route. The dense foliage of the mountain forest seemed to gape at her. Each of the mysterious intersections seemed like a way to escape, but based on her experience, none of them were. A deep fear welled up in Natasha, and she couldn't help but conjure up an absurd hypothesis. Furthermore, she had found Lin Feng, but what if she couldn't get him out? Chapter 104 Uninvited Guests. Chapter 104, Uninvited Guests 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 104, Uninvited Guests. Follow me, we're going out now, Natasha said, seemingly deceiving herself. Her voice, reaching Lin Feng behind her, sounded like the innocent words of a child. Lin Feng smiled, even a hint of sympathy in his eyes as he looked at her back. Now, all the international and multinational agents and mercenaries had been fooled by his formation. And Natasha, left alone, was still unaware of this. This was truly an interesting situation. Lin Feng was even a little impatient to get everything over with. Time slipped by, and no one knew that what they thought was a glimmer of hope was just a half-time break in Lin Feng's plan. The second half was about to begin. In the eastern suburbs of Zhonghe, Chen Haitian was leading a team investigating in the eastern suburbs. Just now, they had discovered an unusual level of radiation. He immediately contacted everyone he could, but no one could explain the cause of the abnormal radiation. Just as they were spinning around like headless flies, an unknown research institute quietly sent over a report, clearly outlining the analysis of various data points. He patiently read the report, which he didn't quite understand, until he read the final conclusion. Professor Lin Feng is the only person in the world who has conducted research on the anomalous data and conditions involved in this case. We suspect a wormhole caused by space-time distortion, but the specific cause is still under analysis. Upon reading this, Chen Haitian immediately knew that the situation was more complex than he had anticipated. He immediately contacted the satellite command center in the military command. This matter is of great importance and may involve space-time distortion. The search and rescue operation must be carried out with caution. If Professor Lin Feng is found, he must be brought back immediately. At this point, the situation had developed beyond everyone's expectations. Professor Lin Feng's disappearance was not only connected to the strange disappearances occurring simultaneously around the world, but it was also very likely related to space-time distortion. What's really going on here? Is it related to our moon landing? Could the birth of Lord Yang Jian have affected Earth's magnetic field? Once the astronauts return and analyze the data they bring back, perhaps the answer will be clear, but this matter needs to be resolved now, not to mention Professor Lin Feng is involved. Without him, how will we proceed with our subsequent work? Perhaps, this matter is related to Professor Lin Feng. How is that possible? But that's Professor Lin Feng. Anything is possible, right? A brief silence fell upon the crowd. The mysteries surrounding Lin Feng grew, and people loved to associate him with many inexplicable and mysterious events. In fact, even though there was no news about Professor Lin Feng, everyone, for some reason, felt a certainty that he was fine. Although no one could articulate the reason, and they didn't speak of it out loud, in their hearts, Lin Feng had become synonymous with omnipotence. However, this incident was indeed not related to Lin Feng. This overlap, a phenomenon that only occurs once every tens of thousands of years, causes spatial anomalies. This coincidence coincides with Lin Feng's disappearance, which is when spatial distortion is at its most severe. With such a coincidence, it's no wonder everyone suspects Lin Feng's involvement. Regardless, everyone anxiously awaits Lin Feng's return. Perhaps it's because they've developed a deep-seated reliance on him over time, but in his absence, they feel like they've lost their support and are constantly uneasy. Furthermore, with a spatial distortion now appearing, even more so, Loki arrives in a remote American town, cosmic cube in hand, filled with confidence. Malekith, the Dark Elves King, arrives with him. Malekith is delighted to be on Earth, especially since this is the place where the ether is about to descend. The 9 kingdoms are now converging in the atrium. From there, the energy of the ether is unleashed. Their destruction is inevitable, Malekith declared with unwavering faith, his heart filled with unwavering belief in the power of the ether. No race, not even the most powerful, could withstand its might. As Malekith fantasized about the destruction of the 9 kingdoms, Loki cast a cunning glance behind him. The destruction of the 9 kingdoms? How could it be possible? He certainly wouldn't allow this fellow to destroy them, he was merely using him temporarily. Then how do we find the ether? Loki asked, feigning sincerity. Malekith ignored his words and continued forward. The area before him had just been sealed off by the United States. This was the place known as Stonehenge, where the Salisbury stone circle lay quietly. This place you see is where we once created and concentrated dark energy. I didn't expect it to remain the same after all this time. The gateway to the ether begins here, Malekith said slowly, stepping forward. Behind him, Loki hesitated. He didn't want to start a conflict with humanity early, finding the ether was paramount. That was why he had brought Malekith here alone. But Loki gritted his teeth. Since conflict was inevitable, so be it. As long as he could find the ether, he was willing to give it a try. After all, he had the Tesseract. If that monkey from Earth and the Tathagata Buda appeared, retreat was the best strategy. Natasha was still trapped in the mountains. For some reason, Lin Feng's footsteps suddenly stopped behind her. Natasha turned and saw Lin Feng staring intently toward the east. His focused and serious expression made Natasha's heart flutter. This person, was it the man who had been trapped in the mountains, lost in thought, only able to follow her steps? You. Professor Lin Feng, what are you looking at? Natasha asked. With her eyesight and hearing, there was no way she couldn't detect anything unusual, but she squinted her eyes and stared at Lin Feng's gaze for a long time, unable to figure out what he was looking at. Our old friend has arrived, Lin Feng smiled and continued. And he's brought a new friend. Lin Feng's words didn't help Natasha understand it all, but instead made her thoughts even more confused. Was this what made Professor Lin Feng different from ordinary people? He could always see things ordinary people couldn't. Or had he been trapped for so long that, like her, he was almost hallucinating? Natasha shook her head, deciding not to dwell on it anymore. She quickened her pace. Professor Lin Feng, let's get going quickly. It's best to leave before dark, otherwise I'm worried you won't be able to handle the night walk. Lin Feng almost laughed out loud at Natasha's words, his lips curled as he spoke. Okay, the premise is that you can get out. Chapter 105 Lin Feng's Performance. Chapter 105 Lin Feng's Performance 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 105 Lin Feng's Performance. Natasha had completely relaxed her vigilance against Lin Feng. Lin Feng was now like a treasure in her pocket. She believed her greatest challenge wasn't controlling him, but rather escaping the forest. As long as she could escape, Lin Feng would return to the United States with her. Therefore, she didn't notice Lin Feng's unusual behavior, simply exploring the jungle to find her next path. In the silence, Lin Feng pondered these two uninvited guests. Loki had brought Malekith with him, which meant the plot of Thor 2 had already begun. How far would he be from reaping the next wave of points? An unprecedented opportunity presented itself to him. If he could seize it, a huge reward of points was within reach. Lin Feng's mind was now focused on how to entertain these two guests, and he no longer had much interest in the current drama. Let's just get it over with. The chaos in the forest continued, and would reach its peak within the next hour. Any area covered by the formation, no matter how far away, was Lin Feng's territory, and he had the power to control it at will. For example, right now. Lin Feng smiled faintly as he watched Natasha's back. She was looking around, confirming the path ahead. The next second, the French agent, fleeing frantically westward, rushed towards Natasha. Where's the way out? I feel like we're getting closer and closer to the west. If we keep walking like this, I even think we'll accidentally walk into Professor Lin Feng. Shut up. Don't say that. The French agent's voice startled Natasha, who was concentrating on finding her way. Hasn't this place always been deserted? Even the sound of gunfire hasn't been heard in ages. What the hell is going on? But as a top-tier agent, she quickly recovered from her shock, looked towards the source of the sound, and shouted. Who's there? The fleeing French agents, already exhausted by the torment of this horrific forest, instinctively dropped their guns the moment Natasha questioned them, hands raised above their heads. We just want to get out of this forest, don't shoot. We're not hostile. Without even a glance at Natasha, they fled in the opposite direction like frightened rabbits, not even turning back. Natasha stood there, stunned, staring at the discarded guns, 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. What was going on? The inevitable bloodbath was over just like that? What on earth were they even here for? Natasha knew nothing of the agents' past experiences. They were all top-tier elites from their respective countries. After all, anyone sent to capture Lin Feng must be a true master, battle-hardened. But they had repeatedly faced the brink of life and death, not to mention witnessing Lin Feng's terrifying golden pupils. Under that inhuman, overwhelming threat, they had long since lost their will to fight. Staying alive was their only remaining sanity and perseverance. Even Natasha, bewildered, couldn't explain the French agent's bizarre behavior. She remained motionless, her gun raised to meet the attack, but the enemy had already fled without a trace. Only their scattered guns on the ground reminded Natasha that what had just happened was no dream. Lin Feng's interest grew. He studied Natasha's dazed face with a playful gaze and asked softly, "Was that someone there just now? Why are they gone? Are they your colleagues?" Natasha, awakened by Lin Feng's words, shook her head subconsciously. "No, these people aren't my colleagues." She didn't have any such colleagues. She continued to explain. "Remember, when we first met, I told you there were other forces targeting you, and they wanted to kidnap you." Natasha's mind was clearly completely swirling with what had just happened, but she still had to focus on explaining to Lin Feng to prevent him from becoming suspicious. A deep fear and unease rose as her doubts deepened. What on earth was going on? This was too bizarre. First, why did those people appear so suddenly, as if they had fallen from the sky, when she hadn't noticed anything unusual before? And then, why were they so panicked? Were they also trapped here? What had gone wrong? Natasha felt as if she were shrouded in a fog, like a blind person. All the answers seemed written right before her, but her inner fear and fragility couldn't sustain her from uncovering even a glimpse of them. Lin Feng watched Natasha, who seemed already in a state of panic, with interest, and decided to add fuel to the fire. But, what they said just now was strange, wasn't it? Why did they say they had no hostility? If their target was me, then you're their enemy, right? But why didn't they just take a closer look and just run away? Or is there something else going on? Lin Feng's words made Natasha secretly regret it. In the chaos, she had heard Lin Feng's question and just wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible, but she hadn't expected it to be so flawed. Given Professor Lin Feng's intelligence and insight, even she hadn't thought she could hide it from him. She had simply relied on the information gap to temporarily trick Lin Feng into following her. Of course, she could also force Lin Feng to submit, but in this strange forest, she felt she was even more vulnerable. There was no point in getting involved. Natasha lowered her head in silence, her expression shifting. Realizing that she had been silent for perhaps a little too long, she shook her head and gave up. Things have changed a bit, and I don't know what happened to them. Anyway, let's get out of this forest and out of this predicament first. Natasha spoke truthfully. She reasoned that once they were out of the forest and met by her colleagues, the moment she and Lin Feng boarded the helicopter, she wouldn't need to give Lin Feng an explanation. Lin Feng could clearly discern her self-deception from her expression. He smiled at Natasha, his steps unwavering as he continued to ask. "But, they said we had to leave quickly, but why do I feel like we've been walking for almost an hour and still seem to be going in circles?" Natasha's eager steps froze at Lin Feng's words. She had long been aware of the anxiety that had been lingering in her, and Lin Feng's words only added to her disorientation. Just as she was lost in the maze of her thoughts, Lin Feng's next words were like a ray of light, providing a glimmer of direction. "Have you heard a rumor? Someone in the local area mentioned this forest." Lin Feng lowered his voice. A chill in the desolate forest seeped into Natasha's heart. Lin Feng began his deception. Chapter 106 Hypnosis. Chapter 106 Hypnosis 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 106 Hypnosis. You know everything? Natasha's eyes widened as she looked at Lin Feng. After all, Lin Feng was a professor. He not only had a rich reserve of knowledge but also had strong insight. What he said must have great reference value. Perhaps the strangeness of this forest will soon be solved. Natasha looked at Lin Feng expectantly. At this moment, Lin Feng was like a life-saving straw. Every word and every sentence he said was precious to Natasha. Lin Feng suppressed the smile in his heart. He frowned deeply, put his fingers on his chin, and pretended to think. He slowly began. This mountainous region has a long and storied history. Legend has it that in ancient times, an immortal once lived. He could pierce clouds and mist, call down wind and rain, and possessed immense magical powers. But one day, he disappeared, and the forest where he once lived has become a pilgrimage site for those who have followed. Natasha was stunned by Lin Feng's words. She pricked up her ears, afraid she'd missed something important. Natasha murmured softly, "So this land has such a miraculous past." Her repulsion for this place suddenly faded. "Yes, and not only that," Lin Feng paused at the crucial moment, glancing at Natasha. Seeing that she was truly listening attentively, her expression was filled with reverence. Lin Feng found himself amused, and the corners of his suppressed mouth curled up slightly as he continued. "Not only that, this is also a place of truth and courage." "Ah, truth and courage?" Natasha, usually calm and composed, cried out like a little girl at this. If Lin Feng's previous words had some cultural nuances that required her to deeply understand and digest, then what he said now sounded like a Hollywood movie trailer, utterly familiar. Ahem, Lin Feng coughed subconsciously, suddenly wondering if he'd been too much of a swindler. But he didn't dwell on it. Judging by Natasha's expression, she'd probably believe anything he said. "Yes, the locals told me, being trapped in this land is common. Do you know how they escape when they encounter such situations?" Natasha's mind was completely focused on Lin Feng's words. She desperately wanted to know how to get out. What? Truth and courage? Natasha felt like she'd sound idiotic if she just kept asking, so she carefully reasoned. "Pretty much," Lin Feng nodded. His affirmation was like a huge compliment, filling Natasha with both excitement and nervousness. Seeing Natasha's cheeks flush with excitement, Lin Feng smiled and gave the final answer. "That's passion. As long as you love the land beneath your feet, the path out will naturally open for you." However, Lin Feng's words completely froze Natasha's CPU. "Passion? Only by loving this land can you escape. What does that mean?" Natasha's expression caught Lin Feng's eye, and he smiled and explained. "Because this mountain is famous in the area, little known to outsiders, yet revered by the locals. So, if an outsider arrives here, they're very likely to be trapped. It's a kind of protective mechanism inherent in the land itself. Is the land of China so magical?" Natasha couldn't help but wonder. If her understanding of China wasn't very deep when she watched the live broadcast of the moon landing, now, after experiencing it firsthand, she truly believed that China's ancient past was no mere legend. It truly is worthy of being a country that once produced countless gods and immortals. Natasha sighed heartily. Suddenly, something subtle shifted within her. Like raindrops falling into a pond, before she could capture the subtle emotion, it had already melted into her heart. "Haha, but I find it a little strange. You're a foreign agent, after all, so it's normal that you don't have such deep feelings for the local area. But I'm a native Chinese, deeply attached to every blade of grass and tree in my country. Why can't I leave?" Lin Feng said with a smile. Natasha looked at Lin Feng. His jaw was firm, his eyes curved, and he gazed at the forest in front of him with a calm and composed expression, without a trace of fear or complaint. Seeing Lin Feng like this, Natasha couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Perhaps she had implicated him. No. It had to be. Not only was she a foreigner, but she was also an agent who wanted to forcibly bring Lin Feng, China's leading scholar, back to the United States. Perhaps she couldn't leave here because the forest was trying to stop her. No wonder it was like this. When a spiritual mountain forest wanted to stop something, what could she do? And Lin Feng's words revealed his profound patriotism. All these things combined had nearly broken Natasha's defenses. She couldn't help but blurt out, "It's all my fault. I must have gotten you into trouble. Otherwise, maybe you could have gotten out a long time ago." Natasha lowered her head and whispered. Lin Feng looked at the top of her head, his body shaking from trying to hold back his laughter. It was hilarious to see the trapped apologize to the one who started it all. He suppressed his laughter, frowned slightly, and continued his pretense. "Although I don't think so, it's a possibility. According to what you said, if that's the case, why don't we split up? If I can actually get out, I'll come back and save you." Lin Feng's words brought Natasha, who had just been feeling guilty, back to reality. She frowned, silent for a moment, then flatly refused. "No. That's too dangerous. What if you run into those people? Protecting you is my highest priority. I can't let you walk through this woods alone." Natasha finished speaking in one breath, her chest rising and falling slightly. She calmed down, thinking, is this the right thing to do? If Lin Feng went out, he might run into the Chinese army, and then he would never have another chance. Or even forever. And she was right. If Lin Feng were to encounter those small fry just now alone, it would indeed be dangerous. Whether from an emotional or rational point of view, her decision was right. Then what should we do? Lin Feng said with a hint of distress. He had known for a long time that Natasha would not agree, but, if she really agreed that easily, what would be the point? I can use hypnosis. Natasha took a deep breath and made a decision. Now she could not afford to hesitate even a little. She made up her mind and continued. I know hypnosis. As long as I hypnotize myself from the bottom of my heart and tell myself that I love this land deeply, I think maybe we can get out. Good idea, Lin Feng exclaimed. You're truly amazing. You're truly an international agent, so versatile. I admire you. Natasha felt a little overwhelmed by Lin Feng's compliments, and the hesitation she had just felt was instantly forgotten. Okay, I'll get started. Chapter 107 A Good Show. Chapter 107 A Good Show 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 107 A Good Show. Natasha closed her eyes and thought silently. As long as she completed the hypnosis and went out with Lin Feng, she would be done. The thought of being able to win over such a reliable and friendly talent like Lin Feng to her side made Natasha even feel a little excited. She stood still on the ground, clearing her mind of all distractions. Just as she was about to begin self-hypnosis, Lin Feng's voice came. Wait, let me say it, you read it after me. After all, I'm Chinese, I know how to say it. Natasha was already in a semi-hypnotic state. Lin Feng's voice seemed to come through a thick fog. Without opening her eyes, she nodded based on her subconscious judgment. Looking at Natasha like this, Lin Feng's lips curled up, and his smile gradually deepened. He spoke in a low voice, bewitching. I deeply love China. I deeply love every piece of Chinese land, and I revere every ancient monument in China, Natasha continued. I deeply love China. I deeply love every piece of Chinese land, and I revere every ancient monument in China, Lin Feng smiled and continued. I love China. I love this peace-loving country. This beautiful and tranquil land is where my heart is. Natasha seemed to be getting into the groove, and she immediately began to speak as soon as Lin Feng finished the last word. I love China. I love this peace-loving country. This beautiful and tranquil land is where my heart is. I am willing to sacrifice my life and freedom for China, and I am willing to fight with all my might to protect China's peace. 100 years from now, I will rest in peace in this land I love. Lin Feng's last words were heavy. Natasha seemed to sense something, and her eyelashes fluttered twice. The sound of wind blowing through the leaves brought a cool breeze, carrying the fragrance of the pine forest to them. At this moment, Natasha spoke. I am willing to sacrifice my life and freedom for China, and to fight with all my might to safeguard its peace. 100 years from now, I will rest in peace on this land I love. Her voice was solemn and serious, and at the end, a tear slipped from the corner of her eye. Lin Feng watched the glistening tear run down Natasha's cheek and knew he had done it. The gunfire gradually subsided, and Lin Feng noticed that the fleeing group was growing larger. Perhaps they were overjoyed and thinking they could escape. But Lin Feng looked at Natasha, whose tears were still wet, and whispered. If you had run into them, what a spectacle it would have been. Let me witness another good show. The world's top agents had come because of Lin Feng, and now, because of him, they had united, some from hostile nations. This rare sight was truly a miracle. Working together, they circumvented numerous obstacles and explored countless avenues, but still found no way out. With no sign of their equipment recovering, these agents from various countries were on the verge of collapse. Countless attempts had failed, their connection to the outside world had been severed, and they had to face the grief of losing their comrades. The atmosphere within the escape team was extremely tense, as if it could explode at any moment. Is this our final destination? No. Even if I die, I'd rather die in my hometown. No one here would recognize us. Besides, we came to China secretly. I'm sure our superiors won't acknowledge their actions to China just to bring back our bodies. William's words further suppressed everyone's emotions. They wanted to retort, the urge to retort rising to their throats, but they couldn't find the words. They had to admit that what William said was the cruel truth. If they died here, their countries would not recognize their identities. Perhaps their final explanation would be that they were just a few foreign criminals, stowaways. Just as their emotions reached their lowest point, and some even lost the courage to move forward, the scene had quietly changed. Light poured down from the sky, showering them. William, the leader, shielded his eyes with his hands, his mouth gaping in disbelief. This is a clearing. Fred. We've reached a clearing, Fred, at the end of the group, heard William's excited voice and, like the others, moved forward. They gathered, gazing at the sun-drenched clearing before them. They were still in the shadows of the jungle, a sharp line separating the shadows from the sunlight of the clearing. Fred spoke excitedly. We have hope. This is a place we've never been before. We're finally not spinning in circles, everyone echoed. Yes. We can finally get out, hurry. Let's get through. I think I'm going crazy if I keep walking in the woods, brothers. Our prayers have worked, many even sobbed. After a long, confusing trek, burdened with immense uncertainty, finally, a glimmer of light arrived, and tears welled up in their eyes. After all, this was no ordinary mission. If it were any other mission, no matter how hard or difficult, they would surely be able to get through it. Because those missions had all been routine, they knew how to handle them. But this time, they first saw Lin Feng's golden eyes, then endured the chaotic hail of gunfire, and then continued to spin in this jungle that felt like a demonic cave. This inhuman torture made the brutal training they'd endured in the past seem like child's play. Let's get going, the escape team united as one, moving forward with anticipation. Their hearts pounded with each step, convinced that the way out lay just ahead. Fred and William stood side by side. These two elite agents, new and old, exchanged a knowing smile. They looked ahead at their jubilant companions, feeling incredibly relieved. Leading them out would be a heroic feat. Fred and William were the last to emerge from the crowd, side by side. They stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The sun slanted down, and they squinted their eyes in relief, taking in the long-lost light. For some reason, everyone stopped before them. Perhaps they were waiting for the two leaders. Fred and William quickened their pace, not wanting to keep anyone waiting. However, just as they pushed past a team member standing still and reached the front, their steps stopped. Their pupils trembled simultaneously. And within those pupils, filled with fear, a person's reflection was reflected. They finally understood why those who had been eager to leave suddenly stopped in their tracks. They also understood that this clearing did not represent any hope for them, but rather, the end. Chapter 108 Lin Feng is here. Chapter 108, Lin Feng arrives 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 108, Lin Feng arrived. Standing before them was none other than Lin Feng. Even the simple words Lin Feng were enough to stir up a storm of emotion in these people. Not to mention that he was standing right before them, only a dozen meters away. However, it wasn't just Lin Feng waiting for them. Natasha opened her eyes almost the moment she heard their voices. Hypnosis takes time, and she was still in a deep sleep, her dreams filled with only China. Then, she heard a clamorous noise, the sound rapidly approaching them, growing louder and louder. Sensing the possibility of impending danger, Natasha darted towards the source. Although she didn't understand why those people were frozen, their faces pale as they stared at her, and she didn't understand why agents from various factions had gathered together, she didn't have time to think, her hand already on her gun. She felt a surge of nervousness. Although she was well-trained, the number of people coming was too great. One after another, people emerged from the jungle, each frozen in place the moment they saw them. Why were they so strange? What was going on? Just then, two familiar faces emerged from the crowd. It was Fred and William, and they, too, froze the moment they saw him, their reactions remarkably similar to everyone else's. Natasha, Fred called out Natasha's name in surprise. His surprise at seeing Natasha here, beside Lin Feng, was almost as great as Natasha's at seeing him. She was actually standing next to Lin Feng. As a seasoned agent, Fred quickly deduced Natasha's purpose. She must have come, like them, to capture Lin Feng and bring him back to the country. But why was she standing with Lin Feng, unharmed? Could it be that Lin Feng had been seduced by Natasha's beauty? But even then, Fred didn't believe it. That was Lin Feng. Natasha had just emerged from hypnosis, and the chaotic and bizarre situation before her was beyond her comprehension. The unmistakable voice in her heart told her these people were going to attack Lin Feng. Natasha drew her gun, aimed it sharply at Fred, and declared, "I'm here." Don't even think about getting close to Lin Feng. Fred and William, standing across from Natasha, were in no greater state of panic. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably, their entire attention riveted by Lin Feng, who smiled at them from behind Natasha. Lin Feng's smile was like the Mona Lisa, seemingly filled with countless meanings, but in their eyes, they saw only the intimidation of a powerful being. They exchanged glances, each seeing a fierce desire to survive. The overwhelming fear had crushed them, leaving them with no fighting spirit or courage. Fred and William nodded and shouted, "Go!" Whether they could escape or not, they had to run for a while. If they kept their eyes on Lin Feng, they would surely die of fright. The two of them were like the leaders, their shouts sending the dozen or so people behind them, breathless and unable to breathe, swarming backwards. "Run, Lin Feng, it's Lin Feng, Mom! I want to go home." In an instant, over 20 people were shouting and rushing back, reckless. Behind them wasn't some terrifying force, but a bewildered Natasha and a still smiling Lin Feng. Natasha stared at them in bewilderment. Even for someone who had experienced many grand occasions, this one was still a bit disorienting. She felt like she'd taken some kind of hallucinogenic drug. Elites from various nations were fleeing like lunatics. How could she say she wasn't dreaming? "What's going on?" Natasha muttered to herself. She didn't expect Lin Feng, who was beside her, to answer her. After all, this was a matter between their agents. Lin Feng didn't even know he was being targeted, so how could she expect him to answer her questions? Lin Feng was equally bewildered. He shook his head and said, "I don't know. Did they eat mushrooms? There aren't any mushrooms here." Whatever happened to those people? Since they had vanished without a trace, Natasha's attention to them faded. Her most important priority now was to get out of here as quickly as possible, not only for herself but also for Lin Feng. The key to this was completing her self-hypnosis. Natasha found a smooth rock and sat down. She closed her eyes, slowly breathing, gradually entering hypnosis again. Lin Feng's words in her ear seemed to be planted in her cerebral cortex. Once she cleared away all distractions, they surged back into her subconscious like a tide. She spoke almost involuntarily. "I deeply love China. I deeply love every piece of Chinese land and revere every ancient monument of China." Her words echoed in Lin Feng's ears with reverent and focused devotion. Lin Feng closed his eyes and leaned against a tree behind him, his smile deepening as Natasha repeated the words. "That's right. It probably won't be long before Natasha wakes up. And when she opens her eyes, she'll be a completely new Natasha." The wind ruffles the leaves, the light slowly slants as time passes. Just when Lin Feng was even beginning to feel sleepy, Natasha's voice rang out. "Professor Lin." Natasha's call seemed to hold a rich tapestry of emotion. Unlike her usual businesslike manner, it felt more humane, even reminiscent of the progressive young women in last-century films. Lin Feng listened to this different voice and looked at Natasha. Natasha wasn't the same Natasha anymore. The one before Lin Feng was a completely new Natasha. Her eyes sparkled like stars as her long eyelashes fluttered, a look only aspiring people could possess. Natasha stood up, her expression gentle yet resolute. She looked at Lin Feng with a passionate intensity, as if she were always ready to set out to fulfill her mission. Lin Feng smiled at this Natasha. "Now, we can set off." As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Feng untied the formation in the mountains and forests. At the same time, the officials of the Chinese army also rushed over. They were a little anxious because they did not find any trace of Lin Feng, but before they could further investigate Lin Feng's whereabouts, a sneaky figure attracted their attention. "That's not right. This area has been sealed off by us. The local people will not go up the mountain at this time." "Who is it?" "It must be those foreign spies. Catch them quickly." With the order from the commander, the soldiers had already controlled the sneaky figure. This person was one of the few surviving mercenary leaders. The moment he saw the Chinese army, he was so scared that his eyes widened. "It's not me. It's not me. Lin Feng is here. Run away." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109. You're telling me this is a foreign elite? Chapter 109. You tell me this is a foreign elite. 2024-08-19. Author, Good Monster. Chapter 109. You tell me this is a foreign elite? The soldiers looked at each other and were confused for a moment, but the Lin Feng mentioned by this foreigner made them very concerned. Before they could analyze the abnormality of this person, The Chinese army discovered other people rushing here one after another. The first of these foreigners were William and Fred. They were kneeling on the ground, holding the dust and fallen leaves on the ground in their hands, their faces full of tears, and their expressions were indescribable excitement and fanaticism. The soldiers did not expect to have such an unexpected gain, and for a moment they ignored their strange behavior and reported, "Captain, we've spotted numerous foreign agents. But their behavior is a little strange, as if they've experienced some kind of mental shock. Some are calling out for Lin Feng. Perhaps they know Professor Lin Feng's whereabouts." Fred and William were quickly brought before the captain. Due to their currently abnormal mental state, there was no need to tie them up. They obediently followed the soldiers as soon as they were escorted. Captain Old Su surveyed them, his brow furrowed at the excitement in the foreigners' faces and the scars on their bodies. Did they know Professor Lin Feng's whereabouts? What had happened to cause these people to be so distraught? Their equipment was so sophisticated that they were clearly no ordinary criminals, yet even so, they bore wounds of varying severity, evidence of having been through a fierce battle. Furthermore, so many foreigners, speaking so many different languages, had gathered here. What other reason could they have for anything other than Lin Feng? But besides finding these foreigners, they also discovered numerous bodies. Professor Lin Feng's safety was uncertain. Captain Su's anxiety boiled over at the thought. He ordered the others to continue the search and rescue, while he faced the two men and shouted, "Tell me now. Who are you and what are you doing here?" Fred stammered in heavily accented Chinese. We're not together. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Fred from the EU, and this is Colonel William from MI8. We came here for Professor Lin Feng. But now we know we were wrong. Please let us out." William's Chinese wasn't as good as Fred's, but based on a few words and Fred's demeanor and expression, he had a pretty good idea of what he was saying. He nodded earnestly, no matter what. He would do anything to get out of this hellhole, away from Professor Lin Feng. Captain Su, whose usually dignified expression was unsure how to react, stood there in silence, his mind absorbing the thought. Were these people truly agents from various countries? But why were they so distraught now, so desperate to leave? What had happened? Don't lie. Answer truthfully. As soon as we find Professor Lin Feng, you'll all be sent to await trial, the two men shouted excitedly. No, Captain Su, assuming they were trying to resist arrest, snorted coldly, only to hear Fred shout. Don't wait any longer. Send us now. Captain Su, who was about to threaten them with a few words, was stunned. What was going on? This was the first time he'd heard someone rush to the prison, as if they couldn't wait a moment. And two top foreign agents? Did they act like agents? Captain Su couldn't help but think of a possibility. Could they be afraid of Lin Feng? At that moment, the voice from the intercom interrupted his thoughts. Captain, we've found Professor Lin Feng. What? Captain Su was overjoyed. Just as he was about to say something, the intercom reported again. He's accompanied by a foreign woman. Captain Su was slightly stunned, confused for a moment, but he spoke immediately. Quickly bring back Professor Lin Feng, and the woman with him. Professor Lin Feng, is he unharmed? Captain Su hesitated, then asked cautiously. Don't worry, Professor Lin Feng is fine, a cheerful voice echoed over the intercom. Captain Su's heart finally settled. Great, Captain Su sighed, turning his gaze once again to the two agents before him. He had been worried about these foreigners because of what had happened in the jungle. He hadn't dared to ask directly about Professor Lin Feng's whereabouts, fearing they might say something that would despair him. But now that Professor Lin Feng was safe and sound, Captain Su calmed down and began to think. Judging by the two men's attire, Captain Su had already believed their claims about their identities. But if they were both elites, why were they so out of control now? Could it be related to Professor Lin Feng? The more Captain Su thought about it, the more his theory seemed plausible. After all, Professor Lin Feng was safe and sound, so it was very likely that these men's unusual behavior was related to him. Although Captain Su couldn't immediately figure out how Professor Lin Feng had managed it, that was Professor Lin Feng. He was the initiator of the live broadcast of the moon landing. Even the divine Lord Yang Jian knew his name. What could Professor Lin Feng not do? Captain Su's gaze swept over the two men before him again. A lieutenant colonel and a colonel sat trembling on the ground, their faces pale. For some reason, the excitement they had shown when they first met them was gone, replaced by a deep sense of panic. They were afraid of something. Just as Captain Su was pondering this, a voice rang out from the woods. Captain Su jerked his head and rushed over. Leading the charge was indeed Professor Lin Feng. His composure was a stark contrast to the foreign agents. The soldiers surrounded him, carefully guarding him like stars surrounding the moon, fearing any mishap. Professor Lin Feng, Captain Su, unable to contain his excitement, quickly stepped forward to face Lin Feng. Finally found you. Lin Feng's presence was a walking miracle at that moment. Seeing him in person was a tremendous honor, especially since he had disappeared and his whereabouts were unknown. Lin Feng looked at the agitated Captain Su, smiled, and extended his hand. Thank you so much for troubling you all. It's so troublesome to have you come all the way here, Captain Su said, holding Lin Feng's hand tightly with both hands. What are you talking about? The most important thing is that you're safe. He had originally thought that Lin Feng, if not a bit arrogant, would at least have a somewhat distant demeanor. After all, his achievements were there. But Captain Su was surprised to find him so approachable, and his recognition of Lin Feng was even greater. Captain Su said to the soldiers behind him, quickly fire the flare and call the helicopter. The most urgent thing now is to get Professor Lin Feng away from here. Captain Su didn't forget the two large foreign men beside him, who were trying their best to hide their bodies and avoid being noticed. He asked Lin Feng, have you ever seen these two people? Chapter 110 Professor Lin Feng is a real man. Chapter 110, Professor Lin Feng is a real man, 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 110, Professor Lin Feng is a real man. Lin Feng raised his lips and nodded. Even Captain Su was puzzled. Could his earlier suspicions have been true? These two top foreign agents, sent to capture Professor Lin Feng, were now so terrified of him. If something had truly happened, it must have been something serious. Captain Su couldn't help but feel irritated by the sight of the two men. He shouted, hey, raise your heads. What are you doing being so timid? Fred and William slowly raised their heads under Captain Su's scolding and the urging of the soldiers behind them. But the moment they caught sight of the hem of Lin Feng's shirt, their hearts raced, and they dropped their heads again. Now, no matter how the soldiers urged them, their heads remained motionless, drooping against their chests like ostriches, even lower than before. What the hell is going on here? Captain Su's confusion deepened. Just then, the sound of helicopter propellers rang out, and a fierce gust of wind blew toward them, sending countless leaves cascading from the trees. Captain Su instinctively stepped in front of Professor Lin Feng. As he watched the helicopter land smoothly, his heart gradually settled. Professor Lin Feng, please return first. There are important matters that require your attention. Okay. Without a second thought, Lin Feng climbed the escalator under the soldier's escort. Natasha watched Lin Feng's movements, momentarily lost in confusion. Her eyes followed Professor Lin Feng intently, and she had heard their conversation clearly. She clearly couldn't stay here any longer. After all, the Chinese army had already arrived, leaving her no chance of bringing Lin Feng to the United States. But why had she followed him all the way here? Even when she saw Professor Lin Feng heading for the helicopter, she instinctively wanted to follow. She knew her identity perfectly well. She was Agent Romanoff of SHIELD, and she had come here to bring Lin Feng back to the United States. But now she didn't want to leave. This land was deeply connected to her, captivated by its ancient history and the warmth of its people. Why should she leave? But if she didn't, what would her role be in staying here? Would she ever see Professor Lin Feng again? Just as she hesitated, a man's voice rang out beside her. Aren't you coming? Professor Lin Feng is leaving soon. Natasha glanced at Captain Su beside her, seeing him looking at her with concern. She nodded subconsciously, and, prodded by his words, she somehow climbed the helicopter's stairs. Shortly after Natasha boarded, the helicopter took off. Captain Su gazed up at the helicopter disappearing into the sky, praying for Professor Lin Feng's safety. Behind him, the foreign agents finally breathed a sigh of relief. This idiot, finally gone. Lian Chen. Even before the helicopter landed, the tarmac was already packed with people. Everyone eagerly awaited, their heads raised with eager anticipation, gazing up at the distant horizon. At that moment, there wasn't a single plane in the sky. This was a secret special zone. After all, any presence would be unusual. The scorching sun beat down on the faces of the senior officers gathered around the helipad. Sweat beaded their dark foreheads, even running into their eyes, but they remained unblinking, as if they were back in their days as recruits. They had just received an urgent announcement. Professor Lin Feng was about to return. They're coming. A roar of joy erupted from the crowd, followed by cheers. Everyone watched as the helicopter, a tiny black dot in the sky, slowly approached, finally landing on the helipad. Chen Haitian was at the front of the crowd, excitedly watching as the hatch opened and several soldiers emerged. They stood in 2 rows facing each other at the helicopter's exit, their heads held high, their faces etched with pride. The soldiers' expressions moved the long-awaited officers even more, staring intently at the hatch with bated breath. The next moment, Lin Feng slowly emerged from the hatch, and the crowd spontaneously applauded. The clatter of the helicopter's propellers failed to drown out the heartfelt applause. Instead, it intensified. For a moment, the applause was like a wave, sweeping across the tarmac. Chen Haitian, among the crowd, clapped his hands vigorously, his thick palms already red, but that didn't dampen his clapping power. Professor Lin Feng was back. Could this mean everything was finally resolved? However, just as his gaze was raptly following Professor Lin Feng, a woman's figure flashed by from behind. That graceful figure beneath a black leotard, that flaming red hair, it was Black Widow. Black Widow, SHIELD's top agent. How could that woman be here? And beside Lin Feng? Chen Haitian's face, flushed with excitement, instantly turned pale. He instantly drew his gun and pointed it at Black Widow. The National Security Bureau officers also drew their weapons. For a moment, the joyous atmosphere of the welcome vanished. Unaware of what was happening, the crowd stopped clapping and looked at the serious-faced men with guns. Why were they pointing guns at that woman? Who is that woman? Natasha Romanoff. Hands up. Why are you here? Chen Haitian shouted, his grip on the gun trembling slightly. They had finally welcomed Professor Lin Feng home, so what was going on? The onlookers' expressions relaxed when Chen Haitian mentioned the name. Most of them were high-ranking military officers, familiar if not familiar with the name. The U.S.'s top spy, the most dangerous individual. How could she be on a helicopter, standing next to Professor Lin Feng? The soldiers lined up at the helicopter's exit raised their guns at Natasha. Their expressions were filled with intense anxiety. They had no idea who this woman was. Just on the plane, they treated her like Professor Lin Feng's friend, and her attitude was so gentle and polite. Who could have guessed she was such a villain? Natasha, surrounded by gunfire, didn't know how to explain herself. Perhaps no one would believe her feelings even if she spoke them out loud. She, a high-ranking American spy, had fallen deeply in love with China. The sense of belonging this country gave her was something she'd never be able to break, a feeling like a wandering traveler finding a home after half a lifetime. But, even she herself didn't believe these words from a long-time American agent, let alone convince these Chinese officers. Just as Natasha was at a loss, a gentle voice rang out. Put down your gun. This is one of ours. Lin Feng's words made Chen Haitian freeze. He froze in place, unable to comprehend what they meant. The others were also bewildered, staring blankly at Lin Feng. One of ours? What did that even mean? The multiple explanations behind this made everyone's imaginations run wild. Professor Lin Feng is a real man. These 7 words, accompanied by a huge, bold exclamation mark, instantly rode in everyone's mind. Recommend a good book about creativity. Recommending a great creative book, 2024-08-19 author, Good Monster recommending a great creative book. This is a book by a good friend, a veteran author from an external site. The ideas are quite interesting, but he's skeptical about my chapter recommendations, wondering if they'll work with my floppy results. I'm not convinced. Friends, give me a hand and add 100 or 2 favorites. Check it out with 100 or 200 follow-up readers. Title: a Siberian tiger, really don't want to fall in love with a foreign girl. Pen name, Kong Xianan. Synopsis: Question: What if I die less than 10 seconds after awakening the perfect life system? After graduating from university and repeatedly encountering setbacks, Lin Feng awakened the perfect life system. Before he could understand the system's functions, a sudden disaster sent him to Mengpo. Good news, I've been reborn, and the system is still there, its functions unchanged. Bad news, I've been reborn as a Siberian tiger, commonly known as the Siberian tiger. Host, Lin Feng, perfect life has been loaded. Task 1, after more than 20 years of dull life, you still haven't tasted the sweetness of love. Do you have the courage to find a girl you like and have a passionate love affair at this prime age? Task 2, Your grades were mediocre in school, and you closed your business after graduation. But you are a late bloomer. Do you have the courage to study hard again, pass the civil service exam, and become a state-owned employee? Task 3. When you were young, you were full of vigor and vitality, full of scholarly spirit, and full of ambition. Do you have the courage to overthrow all this and maintain world peace? Lin Feng looked at his sharp blade that was freely extending and retracting in the tiger's claws, then looked at the series of tasks issued by the system, and fell into deep thought. If I can do all these, what do I need humans for? Single chapters cannot be linked, so please search for the book title or pen name directly. Chapter 111 Lin Feng returns. Chapter 111 Lin Feng is back, 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 111 Lin Feng is back. Chen Haitian sighed silently, and when he saw Natasha's face moved when she heard Lin Feng's words, he knew that his guess was almost right. Professor Lin Feng is too awesome. He is proficient in academic research, and even in his emotional life. Sure enough, truly talented people are good at everything. It is impossible to be a one-sided talent. However, Chen Haitian, who has experienced many ups and downs, naturally knows what his most important task is at this time. He stepped towards Lin Feng. Professor Lin, I'm so sorry. We have been looking forward to seeing you, but the person next to you. We were really surprised when we saw you at first glance. Please don't mind. Faced with Chen Haitian's embarrassment, Lin Feng just smiled slightly. Just let her work with Tony Stark and the others. We've had this happen before, Lin Feng said casually. Just as he was about to walk forward, he turned back and asked Natasha. Is this arrangement okay? Natasha, standing behind Lin Feng, was stunned and nodded. Of course, no problem. She hadn't expected Lin Feng to turn around and ask her. After all, this arrangement was the best for her. It couldn't be better. Natasha's answer was naturally what Lin Feng had expected. Natasha's hypnosis was a result of Lin Feng's every word, and Natasha repeated it. He had no doubt about Natasha's feelings for Hu Xia at that moment. Moreover, even without hypnosis, could Natasha still return? He hadn't used a single bit of his abilities on Natasha, yet he had already naturalized her. The gap in their abilities was too great. Natasha couldn't take him with her. Her ultimate fate would be either death or naturalization. After all, she's truly powerful, and this time, she's illegally intruded into Chinese territory. Letting her go would be like letting a tiger go back to the mountains. Therefore, going to the Avengers in China is truly the best option for her. They'll take you there. There are many people like you there. From now on, you'll all be part of China, part of China. Natasha's heart leaped with joy at Lin Feng's words. She nodded and went to find the staff. Chen Haitian, witnessing the scene, was stunned. Are you kidding me? Is this woman in front of him Black Widow? Who is this innocent-looking, cooperative woman? Chen Haitian's gaze stole towards Lin Feng, his admiration for him growing even more. But this time, it was in a completely different light. But, how did Professor Lin Feng know about Tony Stark's arrangements? As Chen Haitian pondered, Lin Feng whispered. Director Chen, what happened while I was gone? Lin Feng got straight to the point, causing Chen Haitian to put away his gossiping thoughts. He nodded solemnly. Professor Lin, we've successfully landed on the moon, as I'm sure you're aware. The astronauts are expected to return safely in about 10 hours. But, we've also discovered a large number of disappearances on Earth at the same time. The data suggests this is likely related to distortion of spacetime, but some of the information is far beyond current scientific research, so I'd like you to review it. Lin Feng smiled and spoke slowly. Speaking of which, 2 uninvited guests have already arrived on Earth. We estimate that another large-scale alien invasion will occur soon. What? More aliens? And a large number of them, Chen Haitian sighed, trying to suppress his voice. Yes, and this time, it's much more dangerous than last time, Lin Feng said in a low voice. His words froze Chen Haitian in his tracks. The last time had already left him terrified, but this time was even more dangerous? What kind of devastating situation would that be? What should he do then? But before he could be surprised, Lin Feng had already walked forward. He spoke. I have to go back and take care of some things. Could you please give me a ride? It was news time, and every household was watching the news while eating at home. Since the live broadcast of the moon landing, some young people have also started watching the news regularly, thinking that they might get some latest news about Professor Lin Feng. In this rapidly changing world, with huge changes happening every day, the Chinese people are still in the excitement of watching the live broadcast of the moon landing, so they habitually stare at the news anchor's every move on the screen. Suddenly, something unusual happened to the anchor, catching everyone's attention. Her calm face suddenly froze, and her eyes stared blankly at the teleprompter in front of her. Then her expression brightened, and she looked at the camera and spoke excitedly. "Dear viewers, an urgent message. The relevant authorities have contacted Professor Lin Feng. He's safe and sound. Please don't worry. He's on his way back to Wukong University." Even a well-trained anchor couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement upon seeing this message. Her words quickly ignited the entire world through the screen. Sure enough, I knew Professor Lin Feng was just taking a simple vacation. Professor Lin Feng is back. Those missing will surely be found soon. I wonder when Professor Lin Feng will give his next lecture? I can't wait to hear more about Lord Yang Jian. Everyone was discussing this privately and expressing their feelings online. Suddenly, searches for Professor Lin Feng reached a new high. But why has Professor Lin Feng been missing for so long? What happened? Why can't the whole world search for him and find even a trace of him? Someone like Professor Lin Feng would have 1,000 ways to avoid being found. Let's not waste our brains on him. It's more important to think about what Professor Lin Feng's next plan is. I can't even imagine what miracles we'll see next. When will Lord Yang Jian arrive on Earth? I'll look forward to his arrival in China soon. The scene will be spectacular. Yes, without Professor Lin Feng, how would we know about these ancient figures? Soon, news of Professor Lin Feng's return to Wukong University spread from China to the world. Numerous news stories featured Professor Lin Feng, with various articles and posts. Even the repetitive content attracted a flood of likes and comments. As the media reviewed Lin Feng's recent activities, everyone felt more and more that this scholar on Earth was a true god. Whether it was the sudden emergence of the Monkey King, the earth-shaking rise of the Tathagata Buda, or the worldwide attention garnered by Erlang's engine, it's safe to say that without Professor Lin Feng, even if these gods appeared in the mortal realm, no one would know their origins. Yet, Professor Lin Feng has built a bridge between mortals and the gods. Such a person is truly a gift from heaven to this era. Furthermore, Lin Feng is not only unique in the field of history, but has also made groundbreaking achievements in science and technology. Besides Lin Feng, who else in the world would dare to compare with him? And he is a native Chinese, a fact that fills the entire Chinese people with deep pride. However, across the ocean, the US is not so pleased. Chapter 112, S.H.I.E.L.D. loses both the lady and the army. Chapter 112, S.H.I.E.L.D. loses both the lady and the army. 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 112, S.H.I.E.L.D. loses both the lady and the army. The atmosphere at S.H.I.E.L.D. was tense. Director Pierce and Nick Fury stared in shock at the sudden interruption of the signal, momentarily unable to believe what had happened. What the hell is going on? Pierce's frantic voice echoed. A sense of foreboding almost immediately seized him. All this confirmed to him that Natasha, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s top agent, had defected. They had truly lost both the lady and the army this time. They had originally vowed that Natasha would never betray S.H.I.E.L.D., but to their surprise, not only had they received no news shortly after sending her, but the last intelligence they received was that Natasha had been recruited by the Chinese. This seemingly fake news was actually true. Faced with a decisive interruption of Natasha's signal, Pierce and Nick Fury began to question their lives. Meanwhile, intelligence organizations in other countries were thrown into the same chaos. They had anticipated the possibility of their mission failing, but they hadn't anticipated the devastation so severe, with every agent sent missing. This was a day that would go down in the annals of intelligence organizations worldwide. Of course, for China, it was a just and complete victory. The secrets those agents knew, even a single one revealed, could destroy an entire nation. Most of those who survived were now languishing in Chinese prisons. Having been dealt a heavy blow, their former valor and resolve had been shattered. Many even waited anxiously for Chinese interrogation, hoping to reveal everything they knew and impress Professor Lin Feng. Of course, Lin Feng no longer paid them much attention. But his immense intimidation remained deeply ingrained in the minds of the agents, a fear that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. At this point, the intelligence community was completely unaware of Lin Feng's power. They were utterly stunned. What the hell is going on? I can't believe it. Lin Feng returned unharmed amidst the siege of agents from around the world, and yet all the agents we sent out never returned? Didn't Lin Feng go missing? Shouldn't he be alone? Don't tell me Lin Feng alone managed to take on all the world's top agents. What on earth did he do? Quick, call China immediately. We can't let this give China a bad impression of us. We must find a valid reason as soon as possible. Government officials around the world were deeply shocked. Smart nations were already on their way to calling China. China had proven time and again that its current strength and status were unassailable. Before taking action against China, they should consider whether they had the necessary strength and courage. Many countries were currently in a state of tension. Opportunities were fleeting. They had to seize the opportunity to establish good relations with China quickly, otherwise, any later, it might be too late. Chen Haitian, envied by intelligence agencies worldwide, was not in a good mood. Although he had immediately arranged to send Professor Lin Feng to Wukong University, he had no idea why Lin Feng was so anxious to go. Could it be that Professor Lin Feng was about to hold an urgent lecture? Chen Haitian pondered, a variety of thoughts swirling through his mind, but nothing settled. Just then, a call came in from the Eagle Country Intelligence Agency. Chen Haitian, already vexed, frowned at the call, then answered it and spoke businesslike. Sorry, no comment. Thank you for your concern for Professor Lin Feng, he's certainly doing well. Also, please don't call me rashly. According to procedure, you should call the embassy, and our colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will handle the connection. However, the Eagle countryside showed no sign of displeasure at Chen Haitian's tone. They immediately said, Director Chen, we're calling to discuss something else. We sincerely offer you a partnership. We have a captive with special abilities currently imprisoned here, and we believe you'll be interested in him. We're willing to conduct joint research with China. Chen Haitian found this quite amusing. From his understanding of the country, this was a sign of their sincerity, even an attempt to curry favor with China. Of course, Chen Haitian wouldn't accept it. He couldn't let a small profit affect the overall goal of China's revival. Furthermore, China now had Professor Lin Feng, and he believed that Professor Lin Feng had his own plans. Therefore, Chen Haitian couldn't easily agree to anything. Furthermore, they already had a Black Widow, so it was only a matter of time before other captives defected. After thinking it over, Chen Haitian spoke slowly. You can contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs directly. They'll have staff there to connect you. As for me, please refrain from calling rashly, Chen Haitian said, hanging up the phone without waiting for a response. He snorted, thinking, even if the Eagle country wants to cooperate with him, it's for joint research. It seems their sincerity isn't enough. Furthermore, Chen Haitian didn't trust the Eagle country. They tripped them up more than once. China had grown, but these Westerners seemed to still have a certain naivete. In the Eagle Country Intelligence Agency's office building, a senior agent held the phone in one hand, beads of sweat beading on his forehead. The long-hanged line beeped, and he turned around and looked helplessly at his superior. Officer Jack's face was pale, and veins were faintly visible in his clenched hands. He didn't look at the agent. The constant beeping in his ears was piercing. He said in a low voice, "Put down that damn phone first." The agent hurriedly put the phone down. Zick sighed and asked, "What's the situation at Stonehenge? Have the missing people been found?" As soon as he spoke, the agent replied swiftly, "The search for the tourists who disappeared not long ago is still ongoing, but no trace of them has been found. The anomaly is still expanding, and the data closely matches what's happening in China, but the scale and frequency of the spread are much greater. However, the spread has now slowed down and stabilized. I wonder how it will develop in the future." Zick's face paled, and he couldn't help but feel regretful. The entire world was helpless against the Stonehenge anomaly, with the exception of Professor Lin Feng. If they hadn't illegally invaded China and tried to capture Professor Lin Feng, but instead requested assistance from China, wouldn't Professor Lin Feng already be on his way to help them? Stonehenge now seemed like a huge hidden danger. It was hard to say when it would spread further, and no one knew how far it would reach. What should we do? Chapter 113 The Power of Ether. Chapter 113, The Power of Ether 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 113, The Power of Ether. Zick couldn't help but blurt out in front of his subordinates. The series of blows he'd received recently had left him unable to maintain his composure and commanding composure. He continued to speak frantically. William's been imprisoned, and his life or death is unknown. There's not even a whiff of news. Now this has happened again, and the Chinese are treating us. Zick's brows furrowed, his resolve growing. The only one who can solve the Stonehenge problem right now is Professor Lin Feng. Contact the Chinese immediately. We must recruit Professor Lin Feng at all costs, sir. What if Professor Lin Feng can't solve this problem? Agent Harris asked. He was the second in command, second only to William. At the time, he'd been resentful that his superiors had only William leading the team, but now, he was more than just relieved. However, none of them had any concrete information about Lin Feng's abilities. He asked this question, firstly to express his doubts, and secondly to show off in front of his superior. The superior smiled, and his smile revealed his usual sinister side. If Lin Feng can't solve it, then that's right. We have not only dragged China down, but also made China lose its credibility in the eyes of the world. Isn't that great? As the head of the Eagle country's intelligence agency, Zik has always considered the interests of the highest level of his country. If the Stonehenge continues to spread and China can't solve it, it will only affect the surrounding residents, which will not have much impact on them. After all, they have properties all over the world. As soon as Zik said this, Harris immediately understood. He immediately judged that the core of this mission lies in China and Lin Feng. Harris smiled meaningfully and said, "Understood, sir. If anything goes wrong, the responsibility will naturally fall on the powerful Professor Lin Feng, and of course, on China's side." Hearing Harris' words, Zik laughed heartily. That's right. Many ignorant netizens in China are clamoring for Lin Feng in China, and are even using this to pressure the government. This is a matter of national security, so we can't ignore it. However, Zik, remembering something, coughed lightly, and warned. You must still treat Lin Feng with the utmost respect when interacting with him. We know so little about him right now, so if you can seize the opportunity to gain more information from him, or to establish a good relationship with him, it's essential. Understood, sir. Stonehenge. Loki and Malekith were diligently exploring the path with the cosmic cube. They advanced along the expanding rift in space-time, unaware that the impact they had caused at Stonehenge was being exploited by some. Can we really reach the destination by continuing this way? Even Loki, after searching for so long, felt a little tired of pretending. He patiently asked, after all, so much time has passed. Could something have changed? Malekith sensed Loki's impatience and snorted, glancing at him. Are you questioning me? Of course not. It's just that your knowledge of the ether is beyond my imagination. Compared to you, I am like an ignorant human. Loki, sensing Malekith's dissatisfaction, tried to make amends. As he spoke his sweet words, he secretly thought to himself, once they achieved their goal, the fate of Malekith and the Dark Elves would be theirs. His words were quite satisfying to Malekith. Malekith's expression brightened slightly as he explained. You're right. I can feel the ether even from here. Its power is everywhere, and we're all deeply immersed in it. As for the rest, I have my own ideas. Loki nodded silently, feigning sincere belief. If it weren't for the powerful beings suddenly awakening on Earth, if their power wasn't so overwhelming, he wouldn't have needed to rely on the Dark Elves. If he wanted to completely conquer Earth, he had to rely on their power, and using Malekith to find the ether was a necessary step. They searched for a while longer, Loki becoming more patient. Just then, Malekith stopped and said in a resounding voice, "We're here. The ether is just ahead." Loki's heart fluttered, and he immediately used the Tesseract to sense it. The space before him was clearly empty, so why did Malekith say the ether was just ahead? Was he lying? Just as he was thinking this, a sudden surge of energy, like a monstrous wave, swept towards him. No. Loki, overcome with fear, quickly dodged backward. His face paled, his body trembling uncontrollably. Could this world truly possess such overwhelming power? Even with the Tesseract, Loki was like a child holding a toy that wasn't his own before the ether. The ether's awe felt like the combined power of the entire universe, leaving Loki utterly stunned. Malekith sneered at Loki, then, having seen enough of his stunned expression, said, "There's no need to fear, unless the ether possesses you." Loki ignored Malekith's reassurance. He gathered his composure and widened the spatial rift before him. Odin's aura of decay is undeniable. I can clearly sense his weakening, Malekith said in a high voice. His words reached Loki's ears, causing his expression to change. For a moment, Loki wondered, did this mean he could return to Asgard? But before he could think, Molesky had already walked forward. Gazing at the spatial rift ahead, where the ether existed, Loki followed without hesitation. Although Odin was weak, he was still no match for him. Moreover, on this trip to Earth, he had witnessed the unparalleled power of the ancients. If he could convince these figures to help him, then even if he wanted to dominate the entire universe, it would not be difficult. Not to mention Asgard. Thinking this, he had already followed Molesky into the spatial rift. Although the spatial exchange would have the effect of gravity, it only required a slight adjustment for him. At this moment, his attention was completely captured by the huge statue before him. Molesky did not look at Loki, but his voice came with the sound of his footsteps. Odin and Blee. They, father and son, used despicable means to steal the ether from us and then sealed it here. Since then, we dark elves have lost our source of power and fallen into desolation. The passage of time has dulled Molesky's tone, but the hatred for revenge grows deep in his heart. Molesky said calmly, "No matter how much time passes, revenge on them will never fade from my heart. And the day of revenge, I believe, will come soon." Loki's face changed, and he lowered his head slightly, afraid Molesky would notice. But Molesky paid no attention to his expression. He had already walked between the two huge sculptures. Chapter 114 Emergency Call. Chapter 114 Emergency Call, 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 114 Emergency Call. Two colossal statues held crossed weapons, a cold light flashing upon them, signaling to those approaching that there was no way out. Beneath the crossed weapons, at the feet of the massive statues, lay a bottomless abyss. Ahead lay a bottomless chasm, and above them, crossed weapons, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere descended. But this did not faze Loki in the slightest. He instantly discerned something between the crossed weapons. At the intersection of the weapons lay a stone, a slight crack in the stone, through which shone a strange red light. Though the red light, though faint from the tiny crack, held a powerful, bewitching power, like the eye of an ancient mythical beast. Loki could not avert his eyes from the moment he caught sight of it. The red light seemed to possess a power that could draw those who saw it within. Just as Loki was absorbed in the light, the voice of Malekith rang out from the side. Although Odin and Blee are despicable, they're still quite imaginative. They've sealed the ether here with the Rainbow Bridge. No wonder we haven't found it for all these years, he spoke, reaching out his palm to touch the crack in the stone from which a red light seeped. The red light, as if alive, snaked along Malekith's hand. As the brighter and brighter red light enveloped Malekith's hand, his eyes blazed crimson. Malekith's face contorted, and a suppressed cry of pain escaped. But even in such agony, Malekith's eyes were fierce, as if they were on fire, and the red light in them grew even brighter. Even if this process was excruciating, it was all worth it if he could obtain the ether's immense power. Loki looked at Malekith, enveloped in the red light, and his lips curled up involuntarily. He had finally found the ether as he wished. The power before them was enough to shake the entire universe, otherwise, Odin and Blee wouldn't be so terrified. Even the ancient beings of Earth wouldn't be able to contend with such power. Meanwhile, Chen Haitian stood with Thor. Before leaving, Professor Lin Feng had told him that if he wanted to know the cause of the space-time distortion, he could ask Thor. Anxious, Chen Haitian almost hung up the phone with Eagle Nation before finding Thor. To his surprise, Thor actually knew everything. It could even be said that he knew almost everything about the matter. You're saying this is related to the divine realm. The current situation will occur when the 9 kingdoms of the divine realm are connected, Thor nodded. That's right, so there's no need to worry. This happens every few thousand years, but the effects will completely dissipate in about a month. You don't need to do anything. Chen Haitian finally felt relieved when Thor said this. But he immediately thought of Professor Lin Feng, and he couldn't help but feel surprised and amazed. Professor Lin Feng was truly incredible. How could he know Thor knew all this? How could he know about the affairs of the divine realm? Could it be that he was connected to the divine realm? But Professor Lin Feng also knew about the ancient primordial events, something even Thor didn't know. Professor Lin Feng, who exactly are you? Chen Haitian sighed inwardly. However, each of his meetings with Professor Lin had been rushed, leaving him with no complete conversation to date. Once all this was over, he would definitely have a good chat with Professor Lin. While Professor Lin might not tell him, or perhaps he didn't believe he would share his secrets, it would still be beneficial to have a conversation with him, to have more close contact with him. However, the most urgent task now was to report this matter and let the relevant authorities know there was no need to panic. Chen Haitian pondered this and felt a wave of confusion. Why had the Eagle country repeatedly called the embassy and other departments after he had rejected their request? Did they know the matter wasn't that serious? Chen Haitian was puzzled, but the Eagle country's eagerness to contact Professor Lin Feng also made him uneasy. Regardless, anything involving Professor Lin Feng must be handled with heightened vigilance. Professor Lin Feng had just been recovered, and his safety could not be compromised. The gates of Wukong University were already densely packed with people. From a distance, one could see a sea of gray hair, mostly professors in their 50s, including many leading academic figures. Professors from not only Wukong University but also neighboring Yenching University had arrived. Almost as soon as they received the news of Lin Feng's return, they had contacted Wukong University and rushed to greet him. So, when Lin Feng entered, even he was astonished by the spectacular scene before him. Elderly scholars, over 50 years old, eagerly glanced at him, each excitedly exclaiming, "Professor Lin! You're finally back, I've read your research. Without genius, such a solution would be unthinkable. With your achievements, the Nobel Prize in Physics is already within your grasp," the professor said, his voice trailing off. Given Professor Lin Feng's current achievements, a Nobel Prize in Physics would be nothing. With Professor Lin Feng, the history of China has been extended by thousands of years, not to mention his contributions to the world. That's a contribution worthy of being recorded in the annals of human history. A Nobel Prize is a mere century-long achievement, but Professor Lin Feng's name will endure for millennia. President Zhang of Yenching University, who had been standing in the crowd, stepped forward and spoke eagerly. "Professor Lin Feng, if you have the chance, could you give a few lectures at our place? It's right next door, very close." "Old Zhang, how can you ask for so many? Professor Lin Feng hasn't even given a few lectures at Wukong." President Zhao Songgang, who had been standing beside Lin Feng, couldn't help but exclaim. Although they were sister institutions, there was still competition among them. What if Professor Lin Feng was poached? Professor Lin Feng was now an international superstar, and he had to be wary of any ulterior motives. "Old Zhao, you're being too narrow-minded. Even if Professor Lin Feng is a professor at your school, he ultimately belongs to the nation." President Zhang of Yenching University echoed these words, prompting the professors at Yenching to agree. "That's right, Professor Lin Feng belongs to all of China, and indeed, to all of humanity. Don't try to claim him for yourself, we'd also like to learn from Professor Lin Feng." Lin Feng, somewhat amused by the scene before him, hurriedly came to President Zhao's rescue. "Giving a lecture is no big deal. We're all sister institutions. President Zhao didn't say I can't give one at Yenching University. We can just take our time." Upon hearing Professor Lin Feng's words, President Zhang and the professors at Yenching University lit up, their excitement evident. Zhao Songgang breathed a sigh of relief, casting a thankful glance at Lin Feng. At that moment, Professor Feng Min hurriedly pushed through the crowd to Lin Feng's side, urgently saying, "Professor Lin, there's an urgent call from the military. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 115 Want Lin Feng to Take Action? Chapter 115, Want Lin Feng to Take Action, 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 115, Want Lin Feng to Take Action? Feng Min's words made everyone pause, their gazes fixed on Lin Feng, surrounded by the crowd. Lin Feng remained composed, nodding slightly. "Okay." Lin Feng's tone was remarkably calm, as if it were an emergency call from the military, something he had anticipated. "Since that's the case, let's go back. Professor Lin Feng must have a lot of work to attend to right now, so we won't bother him for now," said President Zhang of Yenching University. Although he felt somewhat reluctant, Professor Lin Feng had agreed to give a lecture at Yenching University today, and his attitude was so serious, he assumed he would definitely go. Thinking of Professor Lin Feng's upcoming lecture at Yenching University, President Zhang felt that his visit had already yielded significant results. Therefore, everyone at Yenching University quickly and contentedly departed. Lin Feng took the phone from Professor Feng Min and said calmly, "I'm Lin Feng," a gentle, refined voice called out. "Hello, Professor Lin Feng. I'm Wang Lang from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm calling you out of the blue about the Eagle Nation. They've been contacting us, hoping to facilitate cooperation. Oh, Lin Feng's lips curled. His small interjection caused the Colonel Wang Lang across from him to panic for a moment, and he spoke hastily. Of course, we didn't agree to their request, but we wanted to ask your opinion first. We didn't refuse outright because they promised us something. Lin Feng remained silent, lost in thought. He had known for a while that Loki and Malekith had come here to do something. The special energy leak within the Eagle Nation was naturally related to the Cosmic Cube. But it was still a minor incident, not his turn to intervene. Lin Feng was now preoccupied with planning how to arrange for Yang Jian's intervention. The scene had to be grand, to cause as much shock as possible. So he would wait for Malekith, possessed by the power of the ether, to battle him. Lin Feng spoke. England dares to offer us cooperation even after sending agents to illegally infiltrate China. The benefits they offer should be considered sincere, right? This, Lin Feng's words startled Wang Lang. He hadn't expected Professor Lin Feng to be so blunt, and even more surprised that, at this moment, Professor Lin Feng would prioritize China's interests over his own near miss at the hands of the agents. Wang Lang was moved by Lin Feng, but he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he replied, actually, their benefits aren't genuine. After all, they've illegally infiltrated China before, and more importantly, they've even attempted to attack you. With that kind of record, their offers aren't much of a stretch. We were too impatient, and it's fortunate you suggested it. I'll go and decline their offer. I hope to meet you someday. Having achieved his goal, Lin Feng smiled slightly. I'll look forward to meeting you, too. I believe such an opportunity will come soon, he added softly before hanging up. I guess, the time is almost up in Eagle Country too. Wang Lang heard this, and the next moment, Lin Feng gently hung up the phone. Wang Lang didn't quite understand what this meant, but he didn't overthink Professor Lin Feng's words. After all, given Lin Feng's personality, if he wanted to express himself clearly, he wouldn't leave anyone confused. Meanwhile, outside Stonehenge, Eagle Country's armed forces were already in place. A sea of special forces soldiers, rifles drawn, gazed at Stonehenge in a state of alert. Behind them stood countless tanks and other types of armored vehicles. The sky was shimmering red, a glow emanating from the special rift ahead. The intense and eerie glow filled everyone present with an overwhelming sense of oppression. Just as Commander Jike anxiously glanced at the communication equipment countless times, he received a stern rejection from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What? A rejection? Their attitude had undergone a complete 180-degree turn. Although the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs had been rather cold towards them before, at least they were still able to communicate. But now, judging by the tone of their words, there seemed to be no room for further discussion. What the hell is going on? What happened? Such a firm refusal? We clearly felt there was room for negotiation before. Jike's face darkened, a red light flashing in his frightened eyes, and he couldn't help but regret it. The scene before him was beyond his imagination, and far beyond their current ability to handle. Jike's hands trembled as he shouted, "Contact them quickly. We must contact China as soon as possible. If they don't help, if Lin Feng doesn't intervene, then, the consequences will be disastrous." Jike was undoubtedly devastated. When they had previously negotiated with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they had already adopted the lowest posture in the history of Eagle Nation's foreign relations. Although they knew they had illegally invaded China before, they had always imagined China as a country that cared about the greater good, and so they had assumed that this time, China would offer them assistance for the sake of the entire world. However, the facts proved that China was no longer the same as before, and his previous impression could no longer be used to judge them. What's going on? Are they dissatisfied with the terms? Harris, who had been observing Zeke's expression, asked tentatively. Sir, our China just waiting until we're unable to handle this incident before they swoop in. Harris's words made Zeke's face darken even more. His deepest fear, suddenly articulated by Harris, hit home. If China didn't send Lin Feng, and they mishandled the matter, the Eagle government would be humiliated before the nation and the world, directly impacting the outcome of the next election, not to mention his own career. Quick! Anything China demands is negotiable. Let's liaise, Zeke shouted. As long as China could help and his position remained secure, even a temporary concession wouldn't be a big deal. But China's attitude was making Zeke increasingly uneasy. After some thought, he decided to make another call. Hello, Mr. Pierce, this is Zeke. Pierce remained silent on the other end of the line. He listened silently, wondering what Zeke had called him about. Zeke continued. This situation is urgent, and we need your help. The United States is the only country in the world capable of helping us right now. As an ally, you won't sit idly by, will you? Zick's voice was filled with anxiety, and Pierce guessed this was a difficult situation. Normally, he hadn't wanted to get involved. After all, SHIELD had just lost Natasha and the others. But the situation was different now. Powers around the world feared China. And nations worldwide were watching its every move. At this disadvantage, they had to unite. This is SHIELD's responsibility. Can you explain what happened? Pierce asked. Chapter 116 Just You? Chapter 116 Just You, 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 116 Just You? SHIELD hasn't been so busy in a long time. A large amount of intelligence from Eagle Country was quickly transmitted to SHIELD's database. SHIELD staff processed the data non-stop. Giles ordered them to analyze the data processing report in the shortest time. Nick Fury, who was urgently appointed by Pierce as the person in charge of this incident, was listening to the researcher's report. The data sent to us by Eagle Country is very similar to the research done by Professor Lin Feng of China. What did you say? Professor Lin Feng, Nick Fury said in surprise. He couldn't believe that he could still hear Lin Feng's name at this time. Is this the all-rounder who excels in all fields? Yes, we're also surprised that Professor Lin Feng has already conducted relevant research. And according to his findings, this incident shouldn't be too worrying. The researcher nodded repeatedly, his face, pale from long hours of overwork, a hint of rosiness emerging. The twinkle in his eyes was a look of admiration that Nick Fury knew only too well. It seemed this researcher also deeply admired Lin Feng. But an even more shocking realization struck Nick Fury like a hammer in his heart. Just now, the elite of the United States had gathered together to analyze and process the data sent from Eagle Country. They had spent over an hour reaching the same conclusion that Lin Feng had reached long ago. And it seemed they had no new constructive suggestions to offer. Nick Fury couldn't help but wonder, if it weren't for Lin Feng's research, no matter how much time they put in, they would never reach the same conclusion as Lin Feng, thus reaching a research bottleneck. In other words, the time they spent was simply to find Lin Feng's ready-made answer. If SHIELD had to analyze these reports themselves, their answer might be unsolvable. Nick Fury couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Professor Lin Feng is practically omnipresent. His power is truly appalling, yet this terrifying power is also captivating. Nick Fury shook his head and continued. Besides Professor Lin Feng's conclusions, what else have you discovered? The researcher, a bit embarrassed, stammered. That red light doesn't belong to any substance found on Earth. It's most likely alien energy. Nick Fury exhaled heavily. Alien? Is it coming again? Last time was tough enough. Could the United States and the United States alone withstand it this time? His heartbeat was like a drum. Was it time to unleash his last and only trump card? Nick Fury had long harbored plans to form an alliance. He wanted to gather superheroes of all kinds, forming a super army to defend against alien creatures and protect national security when necessary. However, things didn't go as planned. His chosen candidates all joined China one after another, even Natasha, whom he and Director Pierce had agreed would never leave SHIELD. Fortunately, he still had a trump card, Steve Rogers. However, even this single trump card was somewhat unstable. Since his last mission, Roger had become extremely sensitive and irritable. His past was too complicated, and after so many years of slumber, he was not only unable to adapt to the current situation, but also had no expectations for his future life. It could be said that Roger was now like a zombie. But even if he was a zombie, he was the strongest zombie he had. Nick Fury was determined. And even his steps to find Roger became lighter. Not long after, a fighter plane flew from the United States to the Eagle Country. At this moment, the red light had been completely absorbed by Malekith. Malekith's skin felt as if it were swarming with countless wriggling worms, crackling and creaking within his body. His veins bulged, a terrifying sight. Yes, this is the ether. The ether has returned, flowing through me now. Ah! Such a powerful force, I haven't felt it in ages, Malekith cried out with a frenzy, his appearance now distorted beyond recognition. Seeing Malekith like this, Loki felt no fear, but rather a sense of relief. The power of the ether was so immense that even if Malekith couldn't unleash its full might, the energy he had displayed was enough to instantly slay Odin in his prime. Ho ha ho ha. With such power, The entire world will be plunged into darkness, Malekith exclaimed. His body grew larger as the ether absorbed him, and Loki beside him was like a lamb. Malekith walked forward, each step producing a tremendous sound. At this moment, scientists from all over the world gathered at Stonehenge in Eagle Country. Various instruments, operated by various scientific research institutions, emitted mechanical hums. The cacophony of these clashing sounds was enough to convey the depth of the spatial distortion here. As the sun gradually set, vision became blurry. Searchlights lit up, casting a pale glow across Stonehenge, creating a sense of unease. Everyone silently went about their duties. For a moment, silence reigned, save for the rustling of footsteps and the cold, piercing hum of machinery. They occasionally exchanged glances, exchanging thoughts, but all their perceptions pointed to a stark reality. What was happening was beyond their comprehension. It was at this time that Nick Fury arrived with Steve Rogers. They stood silently outside the crowd, unable to offer any technical assistance. However, looking at the equally bewildered faces of the scientists, they felt that perhaps they knew little more than they did. Nick Fury. And this, the renowned Captain America, Zeke was speechless and even laughed. All he had painstakingly obtained from SHIELD was a conclusion already reached by Professor Lin Feng, and a supposedly ancient American super soldier? America. Even if it's already declining, it can't just pretend, can it? If that red light suddenly erupts, like we saw during the live broadcast of the moon landing, I'll be in trouble for your help, Zeke sarcastically said. Nick Fury knew Zeke was playing both sides, but he said nothing. After all, the massive red light before them posed such a formidable threat that Steve Rogers alone would have a hard time convincing them. Steve Rogers himself was feeling a little uneasy. How could he compare to the ancient gods of China? Zeke's taunting had been so obvious, yet he was rendered speechless. Faced with such immense power, he realized he was just a mascot, responsible for taking photos and signing autographs. At that moment, Zeke, who had already gone to inspect the other side, roared over. Have you contacted China yet? Chapter 117 Contact China at all costs. Chapter 117 Contact China at all costs. 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 117 Contact China at all costs. What the hell are you doing? This situation is urgent. We should contact China at all costs. Let the Prime Minister make the call himself, or even have the Queen do it. We must contact China at all costs, or we'll all be in trouble. Zeke's roar shook the earth, and in the silence, everyone heard it clearly, not to mention Nick Fury and Steve Rogers. They exchanged an awkward glance, and Steve Rogers shrugged. I don't think there's any point in staying here now. I say we should leave. We're no more useful than two wooden stakes standing here. Although he hated to admit it, Steve Rogers knew clearly that if something truly happened, he would be completely overwhelmed by his abilities. Rather than feeling defeated, he felt that his inability was understandable. After all, this situation was beyond the reach of a mortal. Steve Rogers' words struck a chord with Nick Fury. Could it be that he didn't want to leave? He'd actually been thinking about retreating since he'd set foot on this land. But he didn't know how to tell Director Zeke to save face for Steve Rogers. But leaving was the best option now. Nick Fury frowned, as if pondering Steve Rogers' words. Then, he nodded. Just as he was about to say something, a piercing alarm blared. The sound made one cover their ears. What's going on? Nick Fury shouted at Steve Rogers. The scholars who had been gathered together for research cried out in panic. The data is abnormal. Where are the Chinese experts? We can't handle this alone. Suddenly, all the shouting stopped. Even the hurricane that roared across the vast plains surrounding Stonehenge ceased. Everyone held their breath in concentration when a sudden, violent noise was heard. As if the heavens and earth were shattering, a fissure suddenly ripped open in the space before them, shimmering red. Like a firecracker, the red light shot up into the heavens. Like a surging wave, it surged upwards into the gray sky with overwhelming force. In an instant, the heavens seemed to be ignited by holy fire, and a raging fire spread across the gray sky. But the storm on Earth did not subside. The space was like a surging void, and the power that surged out from it instantly raised the fields surrounding Stonehenge to the ground. Even the tanks and armored vehicles safely parked in the distance were not spared. Most were instantly blown into the air and then slammed to the ground. Others were toppled over like clumsy turtles, staggering and unable to get up. The sound of the distant aftermath continued. All traces of human civilization had been annihilated, leaving only the red light blooming between heaven and earth. The entire world seemed to dim, succumbing to the strange, intense red light. Not to mention humanity. During the cataclysmic event, many were injured by the massive storm. Most of the people here were well trained. While they might not have been prepared for the catastrophic event, they at least knew how to protect themselves. Many took advantage of the situation and hid in the ravines, sheltering themselves under the rocks. The red light of the sky reflected in their trembling eyes, and they spoke with lingering fear. What the hell is going on? Is this the end of the world? We can't survive in this situation, let alone escape. Huaxia. Where's Huaxia? They're the only ones who can save us now. Many people's voices choked with sobs. After all, if they hadn't reacted quickly, they would have been blown into the air and slammed to the ground, never to recover. Facing this scene, they could only think of something like the presence of a deity. After all, this force was unmatched by mortals, a phenomenon rarely seen even in nature. They could think of no other explanation than the presence of a deity. Even Zeke, a man who had escaped countless life or death situations and possessed immense power, was at a loss as to how to respond. Like everyone else, he stared blankly at the horizon, motionless. Just as everyone else, dejected and unsure of what to do in the face of this drastic change, one man rose proudly. Facing the crimson light that discolored the sky and earth, he rose. His body, clad only in red and blue, his distinctive symbol drew everyone's attention back to him. A symbol and conviction from the past rekindled the courage within the people. It was humanity's attempt to push the boundaries, representing a nation's highest level of security. It was him. Captain America. Steve Rogers. Captain America, Steve Rogers, stood resolutely in this situation. He was unfazed by the drastic change. Even the crimson light reflected on his face didn't elicit a flicker of fear. His resolute and proud stance lifted everyone's spirits. A fire blazed brightly within the hearts of those who had been desperately hiding in the ravines. They weren't cowards, they were warriors defending their country. Steve Rogers' action stirred a wave of emotion in Zeke's heart. He had forgotten his disdain for Steve Rogers just a quarter of an hour ago. What he now evoked was childhood memories, memories of his fanatical admiration and devotion to Captain America. At the same time, his past courage returned to him. Captain Rogers, Zeke trembled. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. A powerful roar erupted from Director Zeke's body, roaring, trying to make his words clearly reach Steve Rogers' ears. Well done. At the same time, there was a thunderous applause. Everyone else joined in the thunderous applause. Well done, Captain Rogers, you've always been my idol, come on, you can do it, Captain Rogers, go ahead, we've got you back. Their roars transported Rogers back to those days on the battlefield. It felt as if the passion had never dissipated, merely lingering within him. His passion was ignited by the cheers of the crowd. Though the hurricane still roared, sweeping across the land with a force that threatened to level everything, and though a crimson light still shone brightly in the sky, like the eye of a god piercing all life, it cast a cold gaze upon Steve Rogers. He remained fearless and marched forward, step by step. The hurricane strained his steps, and the glare obscured his vision. He walked slowly, but with unwavering determination. Everyone's gaze was fixed on him, their eyes filled with awe and awe. Chapter 118 I'm always here. Chapter 118, at your service anytime 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 118, at your service anytime Steve Rogers' solo was the final source of strength in everyone's hearts. Everyone held a firm belief, no matter what, humanity would ultimately triumph. It seemed as if Rogers' actions had evoked a response. The crimson light that spread across the sky seemed to shrink as Captain Rogers approached, even the vibrant crimson seemed to dim. This sight undoubtedly boosted everyone's morale. Even the heavens and the earth fear Captain Rogers' steps. It seems this isn't unstoppable, we're saved, thank goodness we have Captain Rogers, this is just a paper tiger. As long as we're brave, we'll definitely be able to escape this. Everyone cheered, supporting each other as they stood up. By this time, the hurricane on the ground had gradually weakened, just like the crimson light. The researchers stood up, wanting to resume their research and see if they could do anything. Amid the once bustling yet orderly crowd, Nick Fury stood silently, staring at Captain Rogers' back. Words couldn't describe the shock he felt. Suddenly, a figure appeared within the red light, so immense that even Captain Rogers had to look up at it. Its form, shrouded in red light, was indistinct, but a strange sense of oppression emanated from it. Roger stared at the figure, his fists clenched. His gaze was resolute and sharp, unafraid of the unidentified creature before him. He took a step, swiftly and boldly advancing, as if ready to meet the enemy. He broke into a run, the stars on the red and blue shield tightly gripped and Captain Rogers' hand streaking across the sky as he ran. "Ha!" Steve Rogers shouted, leaping into the air. Even the heavy shield didn't hinder his light leap. After a height of more than 10 meters, he suddenly descended. There was a resounding thud as his shield slammed heavily onto the figure. The impact dispelled the red light enveloping the figure, and Malekith roared in fury, a roar so resounding that the onlookers shrank back. Captain Rogers, however, standing closest to him, showed no fear. He delivered a powerful punch, wielding all his might. The blow was so powerful that Malekith's body trembled, and he couldn't help but double over. Captain Rogers' gaze was stern. He met Malekith's crimson eyes and said, "Will you continue? I'm always here for you." His massive fist remained on Malekith's body, a commanding gesture that made it clear to everyone that he had the upper hand. A mighty cheer echoed throughout the room. But then it was abruptly cut off. They could clearly see Malekith's body slowly rising to its feet, Captain Rogers' fist still resting on him. Captain Rogers' body paused for a moment, and the next second, a resounding explosion echoed. Like a meteor, he was blasted outward amidst a cloud of dust. The blast was deafening, and we stared at Captain Rogers in disbelief. Malekith hadn't moved a muscle as everyone watched, yet Captain Rogers was tossed back. His heavy body and gleaming shield slammed into a massive crater like a meteorite. For a moment, everyone was stunned. They didn't even think to help Captain Rogers up. No, in this situation, Captain Rogers' survival was already a question. What was going on? Everyone's faces paled, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. The courage they had just awakened vanished in an instant. The change was so dramatic that it almost amused everyone. Captain Rogers' words still echoed in their ears. "Do you want to continue? I'm always here for you." Didn't he say I'm always here for you? How could he not withstand just one attack? Nick Fury's expression was as indescribable as a palette of colors. His stiff neck twisted slowly as he gazed with reluctance at the massive pit into which Captain Rogers had fallen. Just as he turned, another earth-shattering roar echoed. The flames surged out like a flood, instantly more ferocious than the water itself. The explosions were overwhelming. The sheer magnitude of the upheaval seemed to rob people of their senses. In the extreme scene, all they could feel was a growing fear. Was this the end? Nick Fury stood there, devastated, his will to live gone. The others shouted in panic, the chaos intensifying. The researchers had already abandoned their equipment and fled, but the world was already dominated by a crimson glow, leaving no safe haven. "No, I want to live. I can't die here. Run. Run, run." For a moment, researchers screamed, soldiers ran, the scene in utter chaos, some even bumping into each other in the panic. Equipment was scattered all over the ground, and many people tripped over carelessly discarded guns. The fallen became stumbling blocks for the panicked masses. Director Zeke, like Nick Fury, stood frozen in place. He watched the scene before him, his pale lips trembling. He shouted at Harris, who had been standing beside him, also completely distraught. "Contact China. Contact China immediately, and have them send Professor Lin Feng. We'll pay any price, as long as Lin Feng comes." Harris, however, had already lost his mind. He didn't run because his legs were shaking with fear, unable to move. He was unable to process Director Zeke's words. Director Zeke's roar only irritated him. Harris burst into tears and shoved Chief Zeke, sending him stumbling. Zeke stared at Harris in disbelief, then, seeing him sobbing, he too ran into the crowd. Harris, Chief Zeke's right-hand man, had collapsed, the final straw. Instead of anger, he felt a surge of clarity. Dignity was no longer a concern at this moment, life was more important. He gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and leaped forward to catch up with the fleeing crowd. The 60-year-old, white-haired chief sprinted through the crowd like a streak of white. This stunning sight, darting through the chaotic crowd, startled many soldiers for a moment, but only for a moment. At this hour, everyone was so busy fleeing that even if Chief Zeke were to perform a striptease, no one would have spared a second glance. Before the massive figure that could send Steve Rogers flying, everyone was terrified. Their only desire was to escape. Chapter 119 Monster Legion. Chapter 119, Monster Legion 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster Chapter 119, Monster Legion. Ever since the vision occurred, everyone had lost hope. It was Captain Rogers' heroic charge into battle that ignited the last glimmer of hope within them, but that tenacious yet fragile hope vanished with Captain Rogers' death. Everyone ran in panic, but it was all in vain. Above them, a crimson light streaked across the sky like lightning, like a terrifying mouth, grinning down at the fleeing people on the ground, mocking their wasted effort. Director Zik looked up at the sky. The crimson scene left an indelible mark on his mind. For a moment, the terrifying image robbed him of all his courage and the will to live. There's no hope for us. He stood frozen in the midst of the running crowd. People kept brushing past him, some bumping into his shoulders, but he felt no pain. In the face of life and death, this little pain was nothing. He looked at the people still running, wondering, do they still think they can survive? Director Zik looked at them, shook his head, his eyes dead. He suddenly realized that Steve Rogers' actions had been a last-ditch effort, the limit of their capabilities, and it was all in vain. Boom! A violent explosion echoed. A figure crashed down in front of the running crowd like a nuclear bomb, smoke filling the air and debris flying. People screamed and dodged, many suffering from head injuries and bleeding from the rubble. They clutched their wounds and looked at the figure in the billowing smoke. Malekith's blood-red eyes were like the eyes of a demon, devoid of a trace of humanity, as he gazed at the people before him with a fierce and indifferent expression. He was suffocated by a powerful pressure. Before this overwhelming force, everyone felt like lambs, powerless to resist. How dare you, such lowly creatures, raise your voice before me? You have no right to exist in a universe ruled by the Dark Elves. His voice was deep yet omnipresent, echoing clearly in everyone's ears. The light surrounding Malekith continued to expand, spreading outward from him. Everyone looked at Malekith in fear, the crimson light reflected on their pale faces. They felt they had nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide. What should we do? Oh my god. I never thought the scene I saw during the live broadcast of the moon landing would happen again. Just as everyone hesitated, a roar rang out. It was the commander. What are you waiting for? Shoot, shoot, shoot. The commander's trembling voice became everyone's lifeline. The soldiers shouted shit one after another, suppressing their voices, fearing the monster before them would hear. Some brave soldiers reached for their rifles, but found nothing, and their hearts sank. Oh no. I lost my gun when I fled. Others secretly rejoiced, knowing they still had their weapons. The few soldiers with weapons trembled as they moved their arms. Their hands, once on the guns, reacted instantly, relying on muscle memory honed by years of practice. They fired fiercely at the dark figure before them. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of gunfire as everyone concentrated their fire on Malekith. Countless sparks rained down in front of Malekith's dark form, and everyone's eyes lit up, but the brilliance quickly dimmed. Malekith seemed to have a barrier in front of him, intercepting all the bullets. The fierce fire didn't even touch the figure. The red light swirling around him grew even more intense, as if every shot had been absorbed, transforming into a solid fortress outside the figure. How could this happen? The soldiers' hands trembled. Crackling. Pistols fell to the ground one after another. In an instant, the pistols, which had seemed like a lifeline just moments ago, were reduced to scrap metal. Shooting was completely useless. A laugh echoed as if from the earth's crust. It was cold, deep, and so distant, yet clearly heard by everyone. Everyone's heart sank as they heard the shadow behind the red light continue. Every resistance you offer only brings you closer to the end. Its words drew everyone's gaze towards Captain Rogers, who lay sprawled on the ground. His life or death was uncertain. If they hadn't resisted from the beginning, would their fate have been better? Under the shadow's immense power, the people had already become servile. But now, they couldn't regret it. The red light surged down upon the crowd like a tide. It happened so quickly that no one uttered a sound. In the blink of an eye, they were engulfed in the glow. They instinctively closed their eyes, but it was meaningless. The red light seemed not light at all, but a blazing flame, stinging the skin of those enveloped within. Zeke was also enveloped in the red light. Enduring the burning sensation, he struggled to open his eyes and gaze at the light flowing around him. He instinctively wanted to touch his body, enveloped by the glow, but it was futile. Just as he was trying to hold back, he realized his vision was now covered by a red cloth, leaving only a scarlet glow before him. What's happening to my eyes? My eyes, Zeke cried out in panic, his voice piercing. He frantically looked around and saw a black, fish-like scale growing on his arm. And not just in one place, but also extending up his ankle, its size growing larger and larger. His skin ached as if it were being torn apart, the excruciating pain leaving his mind blank. At the same time, an unspeakable rage rose within him, overtaking all emotion and reason. A raging sea surged through his mind, wiping out all of Zeke's memories. The red light gradually dimmed, revealing an army of monsters. Each one transformed into a tall, muscular creature covered in black, scaled bodies. Ha ha ha. This is what suits you, the alienated humans made Malekith happy. He took a last look at his masterpiece and turned to leave in the red light. At this time, Malekith no longer followed the original plot. He not only used the Reality Stone, but also used the power of rules. The power of the Reality Stone itself is very strong. Possessing the Reality Stone is equivalent to holding all the power of the material world in your own hands. Not only can you create things according to your imagination, but you can also transform real things. With such a gem, even other gem owners cannot let it be defeated easily. It can be said that among all gems, the Reality Stone is undoubtedly the strongest. At this time, Lin Feng stood in his room with an expressionless face, silently looking at all this. It seems that after I came to this world, the story began to become different. Chapter 120, Survival from a Disparate Situation. Chapter 120, Survival from Despair. 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 120, Survival from Despair. Lin Feng looked at Malekith. His abilities had undoubtedly increased. Just as he had anticipated, just one of countless scenarios, Malekith's increased powers were also within his expectations. It's just that the changes are now becoming more and more numerous, like a butterfly effect that is already causing more and more changes. It's no longer just a problem with Malekith, every little change will radiate into more possibilities for the future. It's clear that this universe is different from the original plot. It will be a brand new universe with Lin Feng in it. That's quite interesting, Lin Feng said with a smile. This time, Yang Jian's attack has made him even stronger against a stronger opponent, and everyone's shock level will be even higher. This will bring me closer to the Tathagata Buddha. When I possess all of the Tathagata Buddha's powers, nothing will be a problem. For now, Lin Feng had nothing to worry about. He had everything under his control, and his progress was already rapid. He always completed his missions efficiently and flawlessly, earning a ton of shock points, so his points were plentiful. This gave him confidence before the great battle. However, Lin Feng wasn't blindly optimistic. He believed that there was no such thing as too many points, and this time, Yang Jian's battle against Malekith presented the perfect opportunity. At this point, the anomaly at Stonehenge hadn't attracted the world's attention. Malekith's power was overwhelming. No one could have anticipated his arrival, and no one could have even considered passing on information in such a critical moment. They were completely annihilated, but no word of Malekith's presence spread. Now that Malekith was gone, those transformed into monsters, devoid of any thought or consciousness, rushed in all directions, following their bestial instincts, rushing towards any nearby inhabited areas. The relevant departments of Eagle Country were completely unaware of this happening. They waited quietly in their offices for Director Zeke to complete all matters, unaware that their colleague had been transformed into a monster. Monsters covered in black scales lurked in the night, their scarlet eyes flashing through the forest. They sniffed at the scent of humans, growling like beasts, their hunger unbearable. Most of the mutants headed outward, seeking the humans, but a small group of monsters, in the opposite direction, headed towards Stonehenge. Nick Fury was among them. He remained determined, battling the negative thoughts that burned within him like a raging fire. It was uncomfortable, but it kept him conscious. However, the pain in his body continued to torment him. Just as he paused for breath, he heard heavy breathing and footsteps. Turning back, Nick Fury saw 5 or 6 other monsters, like himself, lunging towards him. Their black scales were incredibly tough, and the crimson glow in their pupils signaled danger. They were identical to Nick Fury, yet completely different. Feeling their threat, Nick Fury shouted as they raced within inches of him. This can't end here. He instinctively drew his gun and calmly aimed at the monsters hurtling toward him. Despite his monstrous size, he retained all his human habits. For him, at least, he would rather die than tear his companions' necks with his sharp teeth. Gunshots rang out. Nick Fury thought he was using his best marksmanship, but it meant little against the swarm of monsters closing in at high speed. Furthermore, those monsters were covered in tough scales. Nick Fury knew clearly that if they got close, he would be doomed. "Do you sense the difference between me and you?" Nick Fury muttered, gazing at the hideous monsters. He had regained his composure, having already mentally accepted his impending death. Besides, these monsters were all humans in their original form. Being accidentally killed by his own comrades was preferable to being crushed to death by that shadow like an ant. Yet, Nick Fury didn't give up his attack. He determined to hold his ground until his last bullet. He counted down his remaining bullets. 7, 6, 5. Just as he reached 5, Nick Fury suddenly made a decision. He stopped firing, turned the gun, and pressed the black muzzle directly against his chest. He didn't want his death to be a strange and horrifying sight when the humans found him. He deeply doubted the ability of his fellow humans, especially those in the United States and the United States. They most likely didn't know what had happened. After blindly and even misleadingly reporting it to the audience, who knew what their cause of death would be? Better to die quietly than become an urban legend. The monsters drew closer. Nick Fury steeled his resolve. He closed his eyes and fired the trigger with a solemn look, but the gun paused, and no sound was heard. Damn it! The gun jammed. Nick Fury felt a complicated feeling in his heart. He didn't know whether he should be happy or regretful. But what he was sure of was that he didn't have the courage to shoot himself again. And not only did he not have the courage, he also didn't have the chance. The monsters were already close to him. Their low groans and the bloody aura around them slowly surrounded him. Nick Fury closed his eyes, but this time he was extremely desperate. "Oh God, why don't you even give me a chance to commit suicide?" At this moment, a loud roar suddenly exploded in his ears. Nick Fury's body moved, and he opened his eyes again. But he saw a huge boulder in front of him, and under the boulder were the monsters that were trapped and dying. What on earth happened? Nick Fury looked around in astonishment, his gaze fixed on the distant flames. A muscular man in red and blue garb stood proudly between heaven and earth, like a hero. Yet, his body was in a state of disarray, burn marks and dirt covering his body, even his face. But this was Captain Rogers. His resolute gaze remained unchanged as he gazed back at Nick Fury. Captain Rogers is still alive? This realization rekindled hope in Nick Fury. Is this really possible? Nick Fury was both surprised and delighted. He hadn't imagined that after crashing to the ground from such a height, Captain Rogers could still be alive, seemingly unharmed. It was a miracle. And since it was Captain Rogers who had accomplished this miracle, it wasn't all that surprising. Furthermore, Nick Fury felt that Captain Rogers' abilities had increased. With immense joy in his heart, he approached Steve Rogers step by step. Chapter 121, Imminent Invasion. Chapter 121 The invasion is imminent. 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 121 The invasion is imminent. Captain Rogers, can you imagine how happy I am to see you? But what is going on? Rogers was still the same. He smiled at Nick Fury, and then his expression became serious again. He heard Nick Fury's question, but he didn't want to answer. Rogers spoke mutely. "We must stop this as soon as possible. That guy went to the south, where there are many villages and residents. We can't let him hurt civilians. We must seek support immediately." "I alone is not enough." Captain Rogers' words made Nick Fury wake up from his dream. He quickly restored the communication equipment and called on the walkie-talkie. "This is Nick Fury. Captain Rogers and I were assisting Director Zik at Stonehenge. Unfortunately, we've been completely wiped out except for the two of us. The enemy is too powerful, and we are completely unable to resist. He's heading towards Renton now. We must intercept him. He can't be allowed to invade Renton, or the consequences will be disastrous." But no matter how Nick Fury shouted hoarsely, the receiver paid no attention to the unidentified message. Nick Fury's report didn't conform to Eagle Country's format. Moreover, Stonehenge itself was an emergency, and Director Nick hadn't reported him at all. The Eagle Country operator was also unfamiliar with Nick Fury. Although the operator knew Captain Rogers, he had disappeared for years, so he had already assumed he was a prankster. The operator said angrily, "How many enemies are there? Who are they?" Nick Fury noticed the other party's harsh attitude, but in such a critical situation, he still responded, "There's only one person on the other side, a monster probably from outer space." Just as Nick Fury was mulling over how to best describe the shadowy figure, the phone was disconnected quietly. Nick Fury's face paled, and he suppressed his curse as he continued to relay his message to the U.S. This is Nick Fury from SHIELD, an emergency situation. A dangerous creature from outer space is approaching Renton. We must mobilize immediately to intercept it. No time for explanations. Go confirm where it's moved to. Also, you need to contact Eagle Country. The best outcome would be for Eagle Country and the U.S. to work together to intercept the monster outside of Renton. After all, everyone in the U.S. authorities knew Nick Fury's name. The operator, realizing the urgency of the situation, immediately followed his instructions. After reporting the news, Nick Fury and Captain Rogers breathed a sigh of relief. But their hearts still clung to their chests. They had witnessed firsthand the monster's swift movement. Even during their conversation, it was likely approaching Renton. Can we really intercept it? Nick Fury wondered. But the answer was one he didn't dare face. Just as Nick Fury had imagined, Malekith was already not far from Renton. A massive crescent moon hung in the black night sky, shrouded in a crimson mist, emitting a cold, red glow. It looked less like the moon and more like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Oh my god, why is today's moon like the blood moon in the novels? A little scary, but also kind of cool. Is there some special astronomical phenomenon going on today? The Chinese astronauts shouldn't be on the moon anymore, but on their way back, as people spoke, they grabbed their phones and took pictures of the sky. Although the blood moon made everyone feel a little uneasy, no one really thought danger was approaching, so they stopped and watched, not taking it seriously. But as time passed, they soon noticed something unusual. Wait a minute, what's that? There's someone in that red light. How is this possible? How could humans be up there? Are they astronauts? Aren't they back yet? Exclamations echoed through the streets of Renton. People grew increasingly uneasy, and social media was bombarded with reports of the strange phenomenon in the sky. Naturally, politicians took a while to notice. But they ran out of time. As the red mist-like light spread, more and more blocks fell into dead silence. Although Renton is quite large, even the spread of the red mist would take time, and its speed was clearly not accelerating. However, the blocks engulfed by the red mist were isolated from the rest of the city. People outside could not see clearly what was happening inside, and they dared not enter without warning. But from within those engulfed blocks, shrill screams echoed, interspersed with the roars of wild beasts. Hearing these sounds, people were filled with immense fear. Those were not human sounds. What was happening inside? The people no longer had the leisurely mood to take photos of the sky. They ran desperately, away from the red mist. The entire city was instantly thrown into chaos. Military fighter planes arrived at this moment. Missiles were directed at the figure within the red mist. The arrival of the military stopped people in their tracks. They watched with hope as countless missiles rained down upon the figure. However, the missiles failed to penetrate the red mist. Furthermore, the moment they touched the red mist, they exploded. Bang! Bang! Suddenly, a violent explosion echoed through the sky, and the red mist became a sea of fire. People in other neighborhoods could clearly see the sky above the red mist dyed blood red. What the hell is going on? Our missiles didn't work, and they exploded. The commander in the emergency command room stared at the screen in astonishment, his face pale. On the screen, several dark figures emerged from the raging flames. No. Those were not people, but monsters. Their once silky skin was replaced by black scales. They towered, their eyes crimson, and emitted eerie roars. And there weren't just one or a few of these monsters, they filled the streets. They densely packed the streets, wreaking havoc with every fiber of their being. They tore into cars and shattered the windows of street shops. Soon, the streets of Renton were a shambles. But that wasn't enough. They moved with incredible speed, roaring and running, sprinting towards the now safe neighborhood. Can someone tell me how people could become like this? They're getting out. Everyone in the command room was in a state of panic, even the commander fearing these monsters. The missiles were no match, and the soldiers were even more helpless against the mist. If all the soldiers were transformed into those monsters, they would be annihilated. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 122 The Time Has Come. Chapter 122 The Time Has Come, 2024-08-19. Author, Good Monster Chapter 122. The time has come but neither missiles nor soldiers can be deployed. What can be done? Planes flew across the sky above Renton. They were the private planes of the royal family and dignitaries. They had immediately sensed the urgency of the situation and had abandoned the city. If the ordinary residents of Renton were to learn of their city's current state, they would surely be plunged into despair. A voice of despair echoed from the command room. Is there any other solution? Can someone tell me what is going on? The commander, upon learning that the entire royal family had fled, was even more devastated. He roared, feeling completely powerless, knowing he was powerless to handle the situation. The only option was to give it a try. If that didn't work, the commander calmed down slightly and gave the order. Initiate the fighters immediately. Approach from high altitude. Fighter planes took off, one after another, approaching the area of red fog. All pilots wore protective suits, but not enough were readily available. Some wore gas masks. No one knew what the red fog was. It might be some toxic gas. Everyone remained on high alert, cautiously attacking from its edge. If they couldn't deal with the fog, they would at least try to control the black-scaled monsters. Suddenly, more than half of Renton was engulfed in the fog. Furthermore, numerous high-speed monsters scurried outward, attacking pedestrians. However, the commanders could clearly see on the screen that their efforts were in vain, wasting ammunition and providing no benefit. The red fog showed no sign of dissipating, but continued to steadily expand. The monsters were not only invulnerable but also swift, their attacks falling upon them like a drizzle from the sky. From the helicopter window, Prime Minister Lessa gazed down at the sea of fire below. Just minutes ago, Renton was peaceful. While the security wasn't particularly good and the city wasn't particularly clean, Renton was still the face of the Eagle Nation. But who could explain how things had changed so drastically in just a few hours? Renton was engulfed in red mist and a sea of fire, not to mention those terrifying black monsters. Like a plague, they could not be killed or destroyed, yet they continued to multiply, forming a terrifying force. Have you contacted China? The Eagle Nation Prime Minister asked in a trembling voice. But no one answered. All of Renton is doomed. You haven't even contacted China. Do you want the entire Great Eagle to be destroyed? She roared at her subordinates, but deep down she was terrified. She knew exactly why China was so out of reach. If it weren't for their excessive actions over the years, China would never have been in this state. However, the final straw that broke the camel's back was undoubtedly the Eagle Nation's illegal infiltration of agents into China, intending to target Lin Feng, a top Chinese figure. But now, only China could save them. If China didn't intervene, then the entire Eagle Nation would be completely wiped out of history. Not to mention her own humble career. Lessa lowered her voice, then she said firmly, please rescue China at all costs. We'll give everything, as long as Eagle Nation survives this disaster. By this time, the situation in Renton could no longer be concealed. Not only had the people of Renton witnessed these horrific scenes on short videos, but people all over the world were also watching online to see the true state of the Eagle Nation. Many headlines caught people's attention. Emergency report, the entire city of Renton has fallen, suspected of being invaded by unknown creatures. A toxic red fog fills the sky over Renton, transforming humans into zombies. Some on the front lines were live streaming on their phones, but they often couldn't keep up for long. Soon, only their phones were left streaming, their batteries completely drained. Others live streamed the roaring monsters in the streets from their windows. Moments later, there was a violent sound of doors being broken open. Everyone watching the live streams felt the despair of the people of Renton. Oh my god, what's going on? I'm terrified just watching this. It seems a blogger was attacked. People discussed the situation in panic, even thousands of miles away, feeling a chill. Many wondered if they could withstand this if this happened in their own country. Many Chinese silently thought, thank goodness we have Lin Feng. Thank goodness we were born in China. If this were China, we would definitely be able to withstand this. Malekith watched the projectiles raining down on him with a cold expression. To him, it was like watching an ant perform. Would you get angry if an ant threw a tiny piece of sand at you? You would just watch their desperate struggle, finding it a bit amusing. All this was just a meaningless, desperate struggle. He had his own reasons for not spreading the red mist. Just then, a surviving blogger suddenly roared, startling several netizens who had assumed he had also perished. Oh my god. Look! What's that? Netizens turned to the live stream, which was now tilted skyward. The comments were filled with questions. What's going on? While it's good that the blogger is still alive, why does his mental state feel a bit? There's nothing in the sky? The blogger didn't say anything, but zoomed in. It's that wormhole over Hong Kong. I didn't expect to see it again. A corner of a spaceship peeked out from the black wormhole. After Loki found the ether, he left and returned to the Dark Elf warship, using the cosmic cube to open a space-time portal. Meanwhile, Loki's spaceship slowly emerged from the wormhole. The commander stared blankly at the screen. The massive spaceship loomed over Renton like a thick cloud. This sudden change was overwhelming. No one thought the alien visitors at this moment would be friends rather than enemies. The commander, pale-faced, slumped in his chair, wailing. It's over, it's all over. Renton is doomed. Meanwhile, Malekith surveyed the city from high above. He no longer wanted to wait, eager to drag the 9 kingdoms into the abyss of darkness. You are but ants, yet you have witnessed all this. Be grateful. Renton was now completely shrouded in red mist. The pervasive cries for help filled the air, and the sea of fire and dark, scaly monsters were a terrifying sight. Lin Feng's eyes flashed upon seeing this. His expression remained impassive, but within him he knew the time had come for him to make his appearance. In an instant, gleaming silver armor enveloped his muscular form, his blood-red cape billowing behind him. He gently spread his hands, his gleaming three-pointed, double-edged sword firmly grasped. Chapter 123 How dare an ant look directly at the rising sun? Chapter 123 How dare ants look directly at the rising sun? 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 123 How dare ants look directly at the rising sun? A golden light pierced the air, and Lin Feng took a step into the void. The next second, a bright golden light appeared in the thick black haze above Renton. Just as everyone was astonished, wondering what was happening, a powerful voice rang out in everyone's ears. Who dares to shout here? As these words were spoken, the surrounding space seemed to tremble slightly. Lin Feng took a step into the sky above Renton, like a golden sun, suddenly rising above the now decimated black Renton. Everyone looked up at the sky in amazement, and the golden light in the sky now illuminated everyone's eyes. Who's coming? Why do I feel like they were here to help us? Could it be those ancient gods of China? If it's them, then we're saved. The noise startled Malekith, who looked up at the sky, his ferocious face filled with surprise and suspicion. Who dares to shout here? Lin Feng repeated. The voice sounded incredibly familiar to the citizens of Renton. Although most of them didn't understand Chinese, they had just watched the live broadcast of the moon landing and were awestruck by the magnificent scene and Yang Jian's divine presence. So, the voice was incredibly familiar. It's Yang Jian. It's Yang Jian. It's him. I remember his voice. Yang Jian said he would return to the human world, but I didn't expect it to be so soon, and he's the first to arrive in Renton. Yang Jian has come to save us. I wonder if his arrival has anything to do with China. The people looked up at the sky excitedly, their hearts brimming with hope. After all, everyone had witnessed Yang Jian's might on the moon. If it was Yang Jian, then everything would be easily solved. At this moment, people all over the world watched this scene online, and everyone was equally astonished by Yang Jian's arrival. The people of China were also watching in awe at the live broadcast. The moment they heard Yang Jian's voice, they immediately reacted with exclamations of amazement. Yang Jian. It's Yang Jian. He's here. He's finally here. Truly impressive. That golden light of his can easily take down the aliens wreaking havoc in London. Meanwhile, Lin Feng's points kept ticking. Even during his previous appearance in Hong Kong, he had never witnessed such a grand spectacle. And that time, he had been dressed as the Tathagata Buddha. It seemed that all the preparations he had made for the moon landing, culminating in Yang Jian's stunning appearance, had paid off. Now, not only Yang Jian, but Lin Feng himself, was a global celebrity. Yang Jian's reappearance, his first on Earth, was truly incredible surprise for the people of Earth. However, Lin Feng had already anticipated that his reappearance as Yang Jian would lead to a dramatic increase in points. This was why he had waited until this moment to appear. Meanwhile, the Queen of the Eagle Nation surveyed the entire kingdom from high above. The scene was awe-inspiring. A red mist and blazing flames enveloped the entire city. Above the blaze, a spaceship, capable of covering the entire sky, floated in the sky. Beyond this, a golden light, like the rising sun, loomed behind the clouds. Suddenly, the golden light from behind the clouds shone brightly, piercing through the clouds and cascading down towards the ground. Bathed in the golden light, the figure could be clearly seen. The queen of the Eagle Nation was filled with excitement. She knew clearly that an ancient god from China had come to save them. If it was him, then Renton would be saved. However, the highest military commander was concerned. As the commander with the most intimate knowledge of Renton's current situation, he was not overly optimistic about Yang Jian's arrival. Even if Yang Jian, as an ancient god, could fight that creature, how could he counter the red mist? The red mist could directly cause human mutations. Not only would those about to mutate, but even those already mutated would likely be beyond redemption and would have to be eliminated. And that red mist, no matter what they had tried before, had proved ineffective, not even able to penetrate it. Just as the commander was worried, Yang Jian on the screen slowly descended, unexpectedly entering the mist. Oh no, the commander cried out. He hadn't expected Yang Jian to die so soon after arriving. Perhaps Yang Jian didn't understand the power of the red mist and had simply landed. Just as the commander's despair reached a breaking point, his eyes widened as he stared at the screen. His face was filled with disbelief, and he trembled as he spoke. How did he do that? He can actually do this. This is incredible. On the massive screen, the strange red mist was overwhelmed by the golden light emanating from Yang Jian. Yang Jian's golden light instantly eroded the red mist. Golden light flickered intensely. Yang Jian's radiance was dazzling and powerful, while the red mist seemed to shrink, retreating and gradually dimming. The commander then realized how foolish he had been. It was utterly irrational to try to interpret the ancient Yang Jian with the limitations of human knowledge. Yang Jian was the embodiment of omnipotence. Everyone stared at Yang Jian, watching him gaze icy at the alien creature before him, unfazed. Lin Feng, on the other hand, even looked at Malekith with a hint of curiosity. He had only seen Malekith in movies before, but meeting him in real life was a different story. Malekith's strength now far surpassed that of the film version. Thor could not defeat Malekith in this state, he would be completely defeated. Lin Feng shook his head. Even with a reality stone, Malekith was no match for him. Lin Feng's most important concern was how to earn more points. Malekith was also observing Lin Feng, who had descended from the sky. He knew nothing about the shimmering golden man before him, but even instinctively knew he was powerful. He watched him warily, but found he could discern nothing. All he could sense was the fear within him. This realization even startled Malekith. He possessed both the etheric energy and the reality stone, yet he was actually afraid of the other? How absurd, yet so real. Malekith couldn't help but speak first. Who are you? Tell me your name. I have never heard of you in the 9 kingdoms. Malekith's question startled Lin Feng. He sneered. How dare you, an ant, gaze directly into the rising sun? How dare you be so disrespectful in my presence? Yang Jian's voice boomed like the cosmic sundering of heaven. Malekith felt as if a sword had pierced his ears, but out of respect, he remained silent. What surprised him even more was that Yang Jian's lips were only slightly open. If you didn't look carefully, you couldn't see that he opened his lips at all. Chapter 124 High-Speed Showdown. Chapter 124, High-Speed Showdown 2024-08-19 Author, Good Monster. Chapter 124, High-Speed Showdown. Yang Jian's imposing presence and power overwhelmed Malekith, who dared not resist. His body stiffened, and he dared not move. Could such a powerful force exist in a desolate place like Earth? Where did this man come from? Malekith had originally believed that possessed by the etheric energy, he would be invincible and the most powerful being in the universe. However, he had not expected to encounter an existence that rendered him powerless in such a short time. Even Odin of the past would not have been intimidated by Malekith. But suddenly, this man appeared, aglow with golden light, as if he had the power of a god, possessing authority over Malekith. Just as Malekith was about to be overwhelmed by Yang Jian's aura, a voice suddenly echoed in his mind. It was Loki. The one before you is Yang Jian, the ancient divine monarch of China. He must have just awakened. Loki hadn't expected that after finally finding reinforcements, just as they were about to arrive and achieve his goal, Yang Jian would awaken. What a coincidence. It seemed he really needed to take Professor Lin Feng's words to heart. Malekith felt a slight sense of peace at this moment. Although he didn't consider Loki a comrade, hearing Loki's voice and advice in this isolated and helpless moment did bring some peace of mind. And then Loki's voice rang out again. You need not fear him. Even though this fellow was very powerful in ancient times, he has only just awakened and his strength is far less than it once was. So, you don't need to fear him, but you must deal with him immediately, Loki said, feeling fortunate that he had consulted Professor Lin Feng. Otherwise, this godlike man, appearing out of nowhere, would have truly overwhelmed him. Malekith should have been encouraged by Loki's words, but now a trace of doubt lingered within him. He knew the powerful man before him would not let him go easily, so he had no choice but to fight to the death. He had waited for millennia, his resentment growing with each passing day. Now, no one could stop him. Anyone who dares stand before me, I will trample like an ant. No one can stop me from dragging this world and the entire universe into the abyss. Malekith knew perfectly well that he was no match for the man before him. His powers were so formidable, yet he hadn't fully awakened since his awakening. Malekith was filled with fear, but he would not waver in his resolve. He decided to fight tooth and nail. He was determined to trade his own life for the energy of the reality stone. Boom, space and time violently twisted. With rumbles of thunder that seemed to emanate from the clouds, the red mist regained its vitality and began to disperse. The once dim color shone brightly, briefly rivaling Yang Jian's golden light. All of this was due to the energy emanating from Malekith. The energy within him continued to pour forth, impacting the physical world. Lin Feng sensed all of this. This signified that Malekith's mastery of the ether was growing, his mastery increasing. Trading his own lifespan for energy? Loki watched everything unfold before him, pleasantly surprised and unpredictable. Malekith's power was beyond his wildest dreams, and nothing could have pleased him more than the strength of his temporary ally. Professor Lin Feng said that Tathagata Buddha's power might not rival Yang Jian's. I used to be intimidated by Yang Jian's presence, but now it seems Malekith might be able to battle him. Malekith, you are truly my chosen one. Quickly subdue Yang Jian, and then, my grand plan will be a success. Malekith's power was indeed immense, but it came at the cost of his lifespan. Loki not only had to exploit Malekith's immense power, but also ensure he could contain him. After all, he couldn't stand by and watch Malekith drag the 9 kingdoms into the abyss. He simply wanted to ensure his own control of them. He wanted to be the supreme ruler, nothing more. But for now, Malekith had to defeat Yang Jian. Loki had originally had no hope for Malekith's strength, but now it seemed that things might have changed. The energy gained by exhausting his own life must be unmatched. Malekith now far surpassed even Odin's power. Bang! Malekith's power intensified, space in his grasp. The distant sky, tugged by his energy, rapidly turned red. No one can stop me now. Not even you can quench the flames of my vengeance. The 9 kingdoms will become fuel for my vengeance, and the energy of the dark elves will sweep across the universe. And you, Yang Jian, I will bury you with respect. A deep voice echoed through the sky, trembling through space. Malekith's words were audible to everyone, but no one saw his mouth move. They faced each other in the sky above Renton, one enshrouded in a dazzling golden light, the other shrouded in a crimson glow. Regardless of who they were beings beyond human imagination. Everyone held their breath, watching the 2 men in the sky. A battle was imminent. The eyes of the onlookers held a mixture of fear and eager anticipation. In this atmosphere, Malekith took the lead. Despite his boastful words to Yang Jian, his confidence was limited. After all, he had paid with his life for this energy, and the time he had to use his power was precious. He had to strike first and strike with certainty. Following Malekith's movements, Yang Jian followed suit. They were constantly increasing their speed. In a duel between masters, the faster one always has the upper hand. A red light intensified as Malekith attacked, gradually transforming into a protective shield that enveloped Malekith. Yang Jian, on the other hand, increased his offensive power, his golden light like a sharp sword, piercing Malekith. Their speed was beyond human comprehension. Like a streak of light, they passed before people, a fleeting flash before their eyes, nothing visible, while the surrounding buildings were reduced to scorched earth and rubble. A deafening roar echoed, as if all of Lenton were being severed in two. This scene brought a grim look to the Eagle Nation's Prime Minister's face. While Lenton was now practically deserted, and the battle took place in the heart of the dense fog, resulting in no casualties, this type of attack meant it wasn't a question of rebuilding Lenton, but whether it could be rebuilt at all. He had no time to ponder this, and the 2 powerful warriors fighting each other were clearly not contemplating the issue either. They continued their high-speed duel. Like 2 meteors, testing each other, Colliding, their clash ignited one dazzling ring of light after another, the intense waves of light stirring the hearts of the people. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.